The cabin blazed in the night, orange flames licking the sky against a backdrop of falling snow. The fire cast long shadows across the white ground where Clara Wilson stood with a shotgun aimed steady. Three men faced her, dark silhouettes against the burning structure. Behind her, Ethan Morgan lay, wounded, blood seeping through fingers pressed against his shoulder. His breath came in shallow puffs, visible in the bitter Montana cold. "You've taken everything from me," Clara said, her voice cutting through the crackling flames. "But you won't take him." The lead man stepped forward, his face illuminated by the fire-hard lines, cold eyes a smile that didn't reach them. "You don't even know who he is, miss." Clara's grip tightened on the shotgun. "I know exactly who he is." Ethan struggled to his feet, placing a hand on her shoulder. They stood together, two souls who had found each other in the wreckage of broken promises and lost dreams. "It's over, Victor," Ethan said. The leader's laugh cut through the night. "Nothing's over until I say it is, little brother." Snow continued to fall, melting as it neared the flames, just as surely as hope seemed to dissolve in the face of what was to come. The train whistle cut through the Montana winter like a knife, steam billowing into the gray afternoon sky. Clara Wilson pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching as Willow Creek Station emerged from the snowy landscape. Her reflection stared back at her hollow cheeks, eyes carrying shadows that hadn't been there before the war. 8 years as an Army nurse had taught Clara to keep her hands steady, no matter what lay before her. She'd stitched men back together under cannon fire, held them as they took their final breaths, written letters home to families who would never see their sons again. But nothing had prepared her for the telegram that arrived 6 months ago. Catherine Wilson deceased. Influenza outbreak. Too late. She'd been too late. Clara gathered her single carpet bag fingers, brushing against the folded letter tucked in her coat pocket, the reason she'd come to this remote corner of Montana in December 1875. James Westbrook, a rancher seeking a wife, promising a home, stability, perhaps in time affection. A new start. She needed that more than anything. In her mind's eye, she saw herself standing in that small Pennsylvania doctor's office, pressing her father's pocket watch into the physician's palm. "Please," she had begged, "my sister is all I have left." The doctor had nodded solemnly, pocketing the watch with its inscription, "Time reveals truth." Thomas Wilson, and promised to come that evening. But he never arrived, and by morning Catherine was gone. The train lurched to a stop. Stepping onto the platform, the cold hit Clara like a physical blow. Willow Creek was little more than a cluster of wooden buildings huddled against the mountains, as if seeking shelter from the wilderness surrounding it. Snow swirled around her ankles as she scanned the platform. No one approached, no one called her name. The station master, a thin man with a perpetual squint, and eyed her as she approached his window. "Excuse me, I'm looking for James Westbrook. He was supposed to meet me." The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. James Westbrook, never heard that name around these parts. Something cold that had nothing to do with the weather settled in Clara's stomach. "He owns a ranch outside of town. We've been corresponding for months." "Lady, I know every rancher within 50 miles. Ain't no James Westbrook." His expression shifted from disinterest to something resembling pity. "Though you ain't the first to come asking." "What do you mean?" "Had at least 3 girls step off the train last month looking for the same fellow." The platform seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. She gripped the edge of the counter. "What happened to them?" she managed. The station master, Theodore by his name tag, shrugged. "Not my business to know." A voice spoke from behind her. "They're gone." Clara turned to find an elderly man watching her medical bag in hand. His beard was white as the snow, but his eyes were sharp, observant. The kind of eyes that missed little. "Samuel Edwards," he said, offering no hand to shake. "And you would be one to get back on that train, Miss Wilson?" "Clara Wilson." She straightened her spine, a gesture that had become habit whenever her resolve was tested. "What do you mean, gone by doctor?" Edwards glanced at the station master, who suddenly found something fascinating to attend to in his ledger. "You're not the first," as he said, "and you won't be the last to be lured to places like this. Women who arrive alone looking for husbands who don't exist." His voice lowered. "They tend to disappear, some to mining camps, others to establishments that cater to men's baser needs." The implication struck Clara like a slap. She'd been a nurse during the war. She knew the world's cruelties. But to have traveled so far based on a lie, before she could respond, a sharp crack echoed across the station. A gunshot, Dr. Edwards turned toward the sound coming from the freight area behind the station. Without thinking, Clara followed him, her instincts as a nurse overriding caution. Behind the station, a man lay crumpled against crates, clutching his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining the snow beneath him crimson. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair and several days' worth of beard. His breathing came in shallow gasps. Clara knelt beside him, setting her bag down and reaching for his wrist to check his pulse. Weak but present. Gunshot wound to the right side, she assessed aloud, falling into the clinical pattern that had sustained her through the worst of the war. No exit wound. He needs the bullet removed before infection sets in. Dr. Edwards knelt on the man's other side, surprise evident in his expression. You have medical training. Army nurse. 8 years. Clara was already opening the man's coat, assessing the damage. He's lost blood, but if we can step away from him, both of you. The voice was hard, authoritative. A tall man in a sheriff's coat approached, and hand resting on his holstered gun. His badge caught the weak winter sunlight. Most striking was the long scar that ran from his right temple down his cheek, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-grimace. Sheriff Harlow. Dr. Edwards nodded stiffly. This man needs medical attention. What this man needs isn't your concern. The sheriff recognized the wounded man, his expression hardening. This is Ethan Morgan, and you'd do well to keep your distance. The Morgans aren't people you want to associate with in this town. Edwards stood facing the sheriff. He'll die without treatment, Harlow. Wouldn't be the first Morgan to die, nor the last. Harlow turned his cold gaze to Clara. You're new. My advice, get back on that train. Nothing for you here. As the sheriff walked away, Clara remained kneeling beside the wounded man. His eyes fluttered open, briefly startlingly blue against his pale face, then closed again. Dr. Edwards sighed heavily. I have a cabin outside town, Margaret's old place. We can help him there, but not here. Margaret, Clara asked, applying pressure to the wound. My sister, gone now 10 years. Something passed across his face, grief, perhaps guilt. The cabin's yours if you need it, better than waiting for a man who doesn't exist. Clara looked down at Ethan Morgan, his life literally seeping into the snow beneath him. She thought of Catherine, of holding her sister's letter in trembling hands, knowing she was too late to say goodbye. She'd been too late once. She wouldn't be again. Help me get him to your wagon, she said. The cabin sat nestled among pine smoke curling from its chimney into the twilight sky. Inside, fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls. Ethan Morgan lay unconscious on the bed, his face beaded with sweat despite the cold. Clara worked methodically, cleaning the wound with whiskey from Dr. Edwards' medical bag. The bullet had lodged against a rib, mercifully missing vital organs. Still, infection remained a deadly threat. Forceps, she said, holding out her hand. Dr. Edwards placed the instrument in her palm. Your hands don't shake. They can't afford to. Clara probed the wound, face set in concentration. Not in war, not now. As she worked to extract the bullet, she found herself studying Ethan's face. Even in unconsciousness, there was tension there, in the line between his brows, the set of his jaw. This was a man who carried burdens, even in sleep. The bullet came free with a sickening sound. She dropped it into a metal bowl, the ping echoing in the quiet cabin. Well done, Dr. Edwards said, genuine admiration in his voice. Where did you serve? Everywhere. Virginia mostly. Then Georgia. Clara began stitching the wound closed with neat, even sutures. You learn quickly in field hospitals or you break. And you didn't break. She paused, needle poised. Not visibly. Dr. Edwards nodded, understanding in his eyes. I'll leave you with supplies. Bandages, laudanum for the pain when he wakes. There's food in the pantry, firewood stacked outside. Thank you. Clara tied off the last stitch. Why are you helping us? You don't know me, and the sheriff made it clear that helping him, she nodded toward Ethan, isn't the popular choice. Dr. Edwards was silent for a long moment, gathering his things. This cabin belonged to my sister, Margaret Morgan. Ethan is her nephew. He moved toward the door, then paused. Harlow and his kind would let the boy bleed out because of his name. I won't. After he left, Clara set about making the cabin more hospitable. She stoked the fire-heated water for tea and searched for clean linens to replace those soiled with blood. As she tended to her patient, she noticed for the first time the scars on his back, Long, thin lines that could only have been made by a whip or belt. Old wounds long healed, but telling a story of cruelty she knew too well from treating former slaves during the war. In a dresser drawer, her fingers brushed against a frame. A photograph, a young woman with a small boy, perhaps 5 years old. On the back, written in faded ink, Margaret and Ethan, 1855. She studied the image. The woman Margaret had kind eyes, her hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. The child who would become the man now fighting for his life in her care. Clara placed the photograph on the bedside table and continued her search. The cabin was simple but well kept, as if its owner had stepped out only yesterday rather than a decade ago. Books lined shelves along one wall. A rocking chair sat near the fire. Everything spoke of a life lived with purpose, if perhaps solitude. A soft groan drew her attention back to Ethan. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening with pain and confusion. He tried to sit up. "Don't," Clara said, moving quickly to his side. "You'll tear the stitches." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Who are you, tearing?" Clara Wilson. I'm a nurse." She kept her voice calm, the same tone she'd used with wounded soldiers waking disoriented. "You were shot. Dr. Edwards brought us to his sister's cabin." Ethan's eyes darted around the room, recognition dawning. "Margaret's place." His grip on her wrist loosened, but didn't release. "Sarah," he whispered, fevered eyes searching hers. The name struck Clara with unexpected force. Of course he was married. The realization shouldn't have disappointed her, but somehow it did. "I'm not Sarah," she said gently, "but I'm going to help you live." His eyes held hers for a moment longer, something unreadable passing through them. Then they closed, exhaustion claiming him once more. His hand slipped from her wrist, leaving the ghost of his touch behind. Clara sat beside him in the gathering darkness, listening to his breathing even out. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white silence. She was miles from anywhere in a stranger's cabin, with a wounded man in a town where she'd arrived chasing a lie. She pulled the letter from her pocket, James Westbrook's letter, and held it to the firelight. The handwriting was neat, the words carefully chosen to inspire hope, trust. All lies. She crumpled it in her fist, then tossed it into the flames, watching as the paper blackened and curled promises turning to ash. Dawn broke clear in cold sunlight, glinting off snow-laden branches outside the cabin's windows. Clara woke in the rocking chair where she dozed fitfully, checking on Ethan throughout the night. His fever had risen, then broken near morning, a good sign. She built up the fire and put water on to boil, moving quietly so as not to disturb him. Her routine felt familiar, not so different from her duties in the field hospitals. Check the patient, prepare supplies, maintain order in whatever small way possible amid chaos. "You're still here." Ethan's voice startled her. She turned to find him watching her, propped slightly against the pillows. His color was better, eyes clear. "Did you expect me to leave?" she asked, pouring hot water into a cup. "Most would, especially knowing my name." He attempted to sit up, further wincing at the movement. Clara brought him tea laced with willow bark for pain. The sheriff seemed to have strong opinions about the Morgan name. A bitter smile crossed Ethan's face. "Harlow has his reasons." He accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. "You didn't answer my question. Why are you still here?" Clara considered her answer. "Because you needed help, and because I have nowhere else to go." His eyes narrowed slightly, assessing her. "You're not from around here." "No, I came from back east. Pennsylvania originally, though I haven't called it home in years." She busied herself checking his bandages, unwilling to admit how thoroughly she'd been deceived. "The wound looks clean. No signs of infection yet." "You've done this before," he observed. "Yes, war." She nodded, not elaborating. Some experiences didn't translate into words, not for those who hadn't lived them. Ethan seemed to understand her silence. He finished his tea, grimacing at the bitter taste. "Thank you," he said finally, "for not leaving me to die." The simple gratitude caught her off guard. "You're welcome." Later, as morning stretched toward noon, Dr. Edwards returned, bringing more supplies and news from town. "People are asking questions," he said quietly to Clara while Ethan dozed. "About you, about where Ethan might have gone." "Victor Morgan has men searching," he continued, his voice lowering further. "Victor?" Clara asked. "Ethan's older brother." Edwards glanced toward the bed. "I should warn you, there's bad blood there." Worse than most family quarrels. He's the one who shot Ethan. Likely ordered it rather than did it himself. Victor doesn't dirty his hands if he can help it. The doctor's expression darkened. Be careful, Miss Wilson. The Morgans own half this valley or did until the railroad came. Victor sold everything, including portions that weren't his to sell. Clara thought of the photograph of young Ethan and his aunt. What happened to Margaret, your sister? Pain flashed across the old doctor's face. Found dead in her garden 10 years ago now. They called it an accident. But you don't believe that. I believe very little in this town happens by accident, Miss Wilson. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Medicine, bandages, some food. I'll return when I can. After he left, Clara unwrapped the package. Beneath the supplies lay a small leather-bound book, a ledger. Inside, in neat handwriting, there were entries dating back 15 years. Deposits made, money sent to names, women's names with notes beside each. Safe passage to Denver. Placement with the Wilsons. Return fare east. Puzzled, Clara set the ledger aside and continued exploring the cabin. In a trunk at the foot of the bed, she found a map with locations marked in red ink. In a drawer beneath stacks of linens, she discovered letters from women across the country, all addressed to Margaret Morgan, all expressing profound gratitude. As the pieces began to fit together, Clara felt a growing admiration for the cabin's former owner. Margaret Morgan had been helping women, perhaps women like those who had come seeking non-existent husbands. She was so absorbed in her discovery that she didn't notice Ethan watching her until he spoke. You should leave. His voice was stronger now. When I'm well enough to move, Victor won't stop looking. Clara turned the ledger still in her hands. Is that why he shot you? Because of what Margaret was doing? Ethan's expression sharpened. What do you know about Margaret? Only what I've pieced together. She held up the ledger. She was helping women, wasn't she? Women who had been deceived, brought here under false pretenses. He was silent for a long moment, eyes on the book in her hands. Yes, he finally said. And after she died, Sarah, my wife, continued her work. The mention of his wife sent an unexpected pain through Clara. And where is Sarah now? Pain crossed Ethan's face deeper than physical. Dead. 6 months ago. She was helping a girl escape from Victor's camp. They caught her. His voice hardened. Victor said it was an unfortunate accident, just like Margaret. Understanding dawned cold and clear. That's why he wants you dead. You know what he's doing. I know everything. Ethan's eyes held hers. Every girl lured here with promises of marriage or work. Every acre of land stolen from settlers who couldn't fight back. Every deal with the railroad. I know it all. His hand clenched on the blanket. And I have proof. A soft knock at the door made them both freeze. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she moved cautiously toward the window, peering through the frost-edged glass. A young woman stood on the porch, no more than 18, shivering in a coat too thin for the Montana winter. Her face was pale, frightened. Who is it? Ethan asked, struggling to sit up. A girl, Clara replied, hesitating with her hand on the latch. Let her in, Ethan said quickly. Clara opened the door. The girl stumbled inside, bringing a gust of cold air with her. Her lips were blue eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Margaret sent me, she gasped. Clara exchanged a glance with Ethan. Margaret had been dead for 10 years. What's your name? Clara asked, gently guiding the girl to the fire. Lily. She huddled close to the flames, trembling. They told me in town if I needed help to find Margaret's cabin. Ethan's expression softened. Margaret is gone, Lily, but you're safe here. The girl looked from Ethan to Clara, confusion evident. But they said, my aunt's network still exists, Ethan explained. People who help girls like you escape. Dr. Edwards must have sent you. Lily nodded slowly. A man came to our town, said he represented ranchers looking for wives. Her voice broke. When we arrived, there were no ranches, just men. So many men. Clara felt sick. She thought of the letter she'd burned, how close she'd come to the same fate. How did you get away? She asked. One of the women older, she'd been there a while. She told me about a doctor in town who would help, said to mention Margaret's name. Lily wiped tears from her cheeks. I snuck out last night. You're safe now, Clara assured her, though the words felt hollow. How safe could any of them be with Victor Morgan searching for his brother? Ethan met Clara's eyes over Lily's head. In his gaze, she saw understanding of her own near miss and something else, a quiet determination that matched what was growing in her own heart. "We'll get you somewhere safe," he promised Lily, "as soon as I'm able to travel." That night, as Lily slept in Margaret's bed and Ethan dozed by the fire, Clara stood at the window watching snowflakes dance in the darkness. Her world had narrowed to this cabin, these people, this cause that had found her when she'd been seeking something else entirely. She thought of Catherine, of the silver pocket watch she'd sold to pay the doctor who never came, of the battlefield hospitals where she'd learned that survival sometimes meant fighting, not just enduring. Perhaps she hadn't found what she'd come looking for in Willow Creek. Perhaps she'd found something more important instead. Days passed, blending together in the rhythm of care and recovery. Ethan grew stronger, able to sit up for longer periods, then stand with assistance. Lily helped around the cabin, her fear gradually giving way to cautious hope as plans were made to send her to a cousin in Oregon. Clara found herself drawn to the ledgers and letters Margaret had left behind, piecing together the extent of the operation. For years, Margaret Morgan had been rescuing women, creating a network of safe houses and supporters stretching from Montana to the coast. After her death, Sarah had continued the work with Ethan's support. "She was fearless," Ethan said one evening, watching Clara study the maps. "Sarah, I mean. She'd ride out alone in any weather if it meant bringing a girl to safety." Clara glanced up at him. In the firelight with his guard down, he looked younger, the weight of his losses momentarily lifted. "You loved her very much." "She saved me," he said simply. "After Margaret died, I was lost, angry, ready to confront Victor directly." A shadow crossed his face. "Sarah showed me there were better ways to fight, ways that actually help people." "And now," Clara asked, "now I have evidence. Records of every transaction, every deal Victor made with the railroad, every girl brought in." His jaw tightened. "I just need to get it to the federal marshal in Helena." Lily, who had been quietly mending by the fire, looked up. "Is that why they're trying to kill you, because of those records?" Ethan nodded. "Victor knows I have them. He's been trying to find them for months." "Where are they?" Clara asked. A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. "Somewhere he'll never look." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of hooves approaching. Clara moved quickly to the window, heart pounding. Relief washed over her at the sight of Dr. Edwards dismounting. She opened the door before he could knock. The old doctor stamped snow from his boots, his expression grave. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Victor knows Ethan is alive. He's having every cabin, every homestead, within 20 miles searched." Ethan struggled to his feet, face pale but determined. "We need to move. It's not safe for any of you if I stay." "You're not strong enough yet," Clara protested. "I've been shot before," Ethan said with a grimness that suggested the statement was literal, not figurative. "I'll manage." Dr. Edwards shook his head. "Running isn't the answer, son. Victor won't stop, not until he has those records, or you're dead." "Then what do you suggest?" Ethan demanded. "Stay and wait for him to find us. Put Clara and Lily at risk." "I suggest we fight," the doctor said quietly. "It's time someone stood up to Victor Morgan and his railroad friends." Clara looked between the two men, sensing years of history of pain and conflict beneath the surface. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. I would sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. "Victor isn't just trafficking women or stealing land. He's part of something bigger. The railroad wants to build a new line through the valley, right through land that belongs to settlers who came here legally, who have deeds. So they're forcing them out," Clara surmised, "by any means necessary. Threats, violence, fake legal notices." The doctor's eyes hardened. "The women Victor brings in, some end up in camps that service the railroad workers. Others are used as leverage against their families back east who might raise questions about land deals." The full scope of the corruption stunned Clara. "And no one stops this. Harlow is in Victor's pocket, the local judge too. Anyone who speaks against them tends to have accidents." Dr. Edwards glanced at Ethan. "Like Margaret, like Sarah." A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Outside, twilight was settling over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of purple and blue. In that moment, the wilderness beyond the windows seemed less threatening than the evil men were capable of inflicting on one another. "Lily needs to leave tonight," Ethan said finally. "It's not safe for her here." Dr. Edwards nodded. I'll take her to the Fishers. They can get her on the stage to Bozeman tomorrow. Lily looked frightened but resolute. What about you? She asked Ethan. We'll be fine, he assured Yursh, though Clara could see the uncertainty in his eyes. After Lily and Dr. Edwards departed, Clara and Ethan were left alone in the cabin's growing shadows. Clara lit the lamps, their warm glow pushing back against the darkness outside. Neither spoke for a long time, each lost in thought. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. Why did you come to Willow Creek, Clara? The question caught her off guard. It was the first time he'd called her by her first name. I told you, I answered an advertisement. She moved to the fire, adding another log. A man named James Westbrook was looking for a wife. Said he had a ranch outside of town. Ethan's expression darkened. James Westbrook doesn't exist. I know that now. Clara couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. The station master told me I wasn't the first to come looking for him. Did you keep the letter, the one from Westbrook? She shook her head. I burned it, the first night here. Ethan nodded as if confirming something to himself. It's Victor's method. He has men who write those letters, place those advertisements. They target women who might be vulnerable widows, spinsters, women without family. Clara thought of her own situation. No family since Catherine's death. Years spent moving from one battlefield hospital to another. Rootless. Alone. How did he find me? She wondered aloud. Obituaries, perhaps. Public records. Ethan's voice softened. Who did you lose, Clara? The question pierced her carefully maintained composure. She hadn't spoken of Catherine, not really. Not about how it felt to receive that telegram, to know she was too late. My sister, she said, voice barely audible. Catherine, 6 months ago, influenza. She swallowed hard. I sold my father's pocket watch to pay for a doctor. He never came. Ethan was silent, letting her words hang in the air between them. I couldn't save her, Mom. Clara continued, the admission breaking something loose inside of him. I spent years saving strangers on battlefields, but I couldn't save my own sister. That's why you saved me, Ethan said quietly. It wasn't a question. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had lost his aunt, his wife, who carried scars both visible and hidden, yet still fought for what was right. Yes, she admitted, but also because no one else would. In the silence that followed, something shifted between them, an understanding, a recognition of shared pain and purpose. They were two broken people who had found each other in the wreckage of their lives. Outside, the wind picked up, sending snow swirling against the windows. Inside, the fire crackled, casting warm light over two souls no longer quite so alone. Dawn was still hours away when Clara woke to the sound of Ethan moving about the cabin. She sat up in the rocking chair where she'd fallen asleep, watching as he carefully tested his injured side, wincing but mobile. You should be resting, she said. He glanced at her, not surprised that she was awake. I've rested enough. We need to be ready. For what? For whatever comes. He moved to the window, peering out at the darkness. Victor's men could find us any day now. Clara joined him at the window, shoulder to shoulder. The night was clear, stars brilliant against the black sky, the snow-covered ground reflecting their light. Beautiful and desolate. What will you do if they come? She asked. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What I should have done years ago. Stop running. Face him. That's suicide. Maybe. He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. But I'm tired of people dying while I hide. In fact, Clara thought of battlefields, of the futility of certain charges of men sent to die for causes that seemed unclear, even to those commanding them. Dying solves nothing, she said firmly. You have evidence that could stop Victor, bring justice for Margaret, for Sarah, for all those women. That matters more than revenge. Ethan's expression softened. It's not about revenge, Clara. It's about making things right. Then live to do that, she insisted. We'll find a way to get your evidence to the federal marshal without getting you killed in the process. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Clara realized what she'd said, how easily she'd included herself in his fight, but she didn't take it back. Yes, we. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Then Ethan reached out his hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face with unexpected gentleness. You remind me of her sometimes, he said softly. Sarah, she never backed down either. Clara didn't know how to respond to that, whether to feel complimented or reminded that she stood in another woman's shadow. Before she could decide, Ethan moved away, returning to the practical matters of their situation. We need supplies, ammunition for the rifle, more food. He glanced around the cabin. And we need to secure this place as best we can. Clara nodded, grateful for the shift to practicalities. Sir Edward's going to bring supplies when he returns. They spent the remaining hours of darkness preparing as best they could, checking the cabin's few windows, reinforcing the door, taking inventory of what weapons they had. Just one rifle, a shotgun, that had belonged to Margaret, and Ethan's revolver, which had been emptied when he was shot. As the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern sky, they sat together at the small table, a map of the surrounding area spread before them. If we need to leave quickly, this is the road, Ethan said, tracing a line through the mountains. It avoids the main trails, the places Victor's men would watch. Clara studied the map, memorizing the path. And if we get separated, Ethan looked up, meeting her eyes. Head for Helena, find Marshal Sullivan, tell him everything. The seriousness in his voice sent a chill through her. We won't get separated, she said firmly. He didn't contradict her, but his expression spoke volumes. They both knew the dangers they faced. Later that morning, Dr. Edwards returned, bringing the supplies they had requested and news from town. Lily's safely away, he reported. Stage left for Bozeman at first light. Relief softened Ethan's features. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, the doctor warned. Victor's men are everywhere. They searched my house yesterday and they're not being gentle about it. They know I'm helping you. You should go, Ethan said. Get out of town until this is over. Dr. Edwards shook his head. I've lived in Willow Creek for 30 years. I'll not be driven out now. He turned to Clara. How are you holding up, Miss Wilson? I'm fine, she assured him, though fine hardly captured the tumult of emotions she'd experienced in the past days. The doctor's shrewd eyes studied her face. You look tired, both of you do. He reached into his medical bag, withdrawing a small envelope. Sleeping powder if you need it. Clara accepted it with a nod of thanks. After 8 years of battlefield medicine, she was no stranger to sleepless nights, but the constant vigilance was wearing. There's something else you should know, Dr. Edwards said, his voice lowering. Sheriff Harlow has been asking questions about you specifically, Miss Wilson. Clara frowned. Me why? He knows you arrived on the last train, knows you were looking for James Westbrook. The doctor's expression was grave. And he knows you helped Ethan. Ethan's hand clenched on the table. Harlow. The station master most likely. Or someone saw you at the freight platform. Dr. Edwards sighed. This town has eyes everywhere, and most of them report to Victor or Harlow. The implications settled over Clara like a physical weight. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was involved. Marked. I'll stay tonight, Dr. Edwards decided. Keep watch. You both need rest. Neither Clara nor Ethan argued. The strain of the past days had taken its toll, and the doctor's presence offered a brief respite, a chance to lower their guard if only for a few hours. As darkness fell once more, Clara found herself sitting on the edge of Margaret's bed, slowly unwinding her hair from its practical bun. The simple act felt foreign after days of constant vigilance. Her fingers moved mechanically, combing through the long, brown strands. A soft knock at the bedroom door startled her. Come in, she called hastily, gathering her hair back. Ethan entered, hesitating at the threshold. I wanted to check if you needed anything. I'm fine, thank you. She noticed he was holding something, a small silver object that glinted in the lamplight. He followed her gaze. I found this among Sarah's things, he said, holding it out to her. A pocket watch, tarnished but still beautiful. She always kept it, said it belonged to someone who needed to know their time wasn't up yet. Clara took the watch with trembling fingers. It wasn't her father's, of course it wasn't, but the similarity made her throat tighten. It's beautiful. Keep it, Ethan said. I think she would have wanted you to have it. The gesture touched her deeply. Thank you. Ethan lingered as if wanting to say more. In the soft lamplight, with his guard down, he looked younger, the weight of his burdens momentarily lightened. Clara, he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. Yes. He shook his head slightly. Nothing. Get some rest. After he left, Clara opened the watch. It still kept time, the tiny mechanism ticking steadily despite its age. Inside the cover, a small inscription caught her eye. To EW, time reveals truth. EW, not Margaret Morgan, whose initials would have been MM. Another mystery, another piece of the puzzle that was Willow Creek and its inhabitants. Clara closed the watch, holding it in her palm. Its weight was comforting somehow, a tangible connection to the past, to the women who had occupied this cabin before her, who had fought in their own ways against injustice. She thought of Catherine, of the silver watch she'd sold to pay the doctor who never came, of Margaret and Sarah, women she'd never met, but whose legacy she now carried, of Ethan, bearing the weight of so much loss, yet still fighting. For the first time since receiving that telegram 6 months ago, Clara felt something stir within her that she thought long dead: purpose. Not just survival, not just endurance, but a reason to keep going, to fight. As she drifted towards sleep, the pocket watch clutched in her hand, Clara made a silent promise to Catherine, to herself, to the women whose cabin sheltered her now. She would see this through, whatever came. Outside, snow began to fall once more, blanketing the world in silence. Inside the cabin, three souls, the doctor, the nurse, the wounded man, found brief respite in the calm before the inevitable storm. Morning arrived with a world transformed by snow. Heavy flakes continued to fall, obscuring the landscape beyond the cabin's frosted windows, creating a deceptive sense of peace. Clara woke before the others, the pocket watch still clutched in her palm, its metal warm from her skin. Dr. Edwards slept in the rocking chair, head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, years etched into the lines of his face. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, panic flared in Clara's chest. Had he left during the night, attempted to face Victor alone? Then she heard it, the soft thud of an axe outside. She moved to the window, brushing frost from the glass with her fingertips. Ethan stood in the clearing, splitting wood, his breath clouding in the cold air. Each swing was measured, his movements careful to protect his healing wound, but determined nonetheless. A man preparing. Dr. Edwards stirred behind her. He shouldn't be doing that, he said, voice rough with sleep. He'll tear his stitches. I doubt telling him that would make a difference, Clara replied, unable to keep a note of admiration from her voice. The doctor joined her at the window, watching Ethan work. He's like his aunt that way, stubborn as the mountains. A faint smile touched his lips. Margaret would have liked you, Miss Wilson. The comparison warmed something in Clara. You were close to her. She was my sister, and the best person I knew. Grief flickered across his weathered features. Clara hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since she discovered Margaret's ledgers. The network she built helping women escape. You're still running it, aren't you? Art Edwards studied her face as if weighing how much to reveal. Someone had to, he said finally. After Margaret died, Sarah took over. After Sarah, he shook his head. There are still girls arriving every month, lured by lies. Someone has to help them. Like Lily. Like me if I hadn't found Ethan first. The doctor's eyes held hers. Margaret used to say there are no accidents, only opportunities disguised as misfortune. Before Clara could respond, the door opened, emitting a gust of cold air, and Ethan. His shoulders dusted with snow, cheeks reddened from exertion. Storm's getting worse, he reported, stamping snow from his boots. If Victor's men are searching, they won't get far in this weather. Small mercies, Dr. Edwards muttered. Let me check your stitches. You had no business swinging an axe. Ethan submitted to the examination with surprising docility. Clara busied herself preparing breakfast coffee, the last of the bread, dried apples reconstituted in hot water. Simple fare, but welcome in the cold. As they ate, Dr. Edwards outlined his plan. I'll return to town today while the storm provides cover. Keep my ear to the ground. See what Victor's planning. It's too dangerous, Ethan objected. If he suspects you're helping me. I'm an old man, the doctor interrupted. What more can they take from me? My sister already gone. My good name, I care nothing for it. His voice hardened. But I won't sit by while Victor Morgan destroys more lives. The determination in his voice silenced further protest. After breakfast, he prepared to leave, checking his medical bag out of habit. Be vigilant, he advised as he donned his heavy coat. Victor won't let the storm stop him for long. After the doctor departed, disappearing into the curtain of falling snow, Clara and Ethan were left alone in the cabin's warm confines. An awkward silence settled between them, punctuated only by the crackling fire and the steady tick of the pocket watch now resting on the table. You should rest, Clara said, finally gathering the breakfast dishes. Dr. Edwards is right. You're pushing too hard. Ethan moved to help her, wincing slightly as he reached for a cup. I've had worse. Clara stopped, turning to face him fully. Those scars on your back, they're not from the war, are they? Surprise flickered across his face, followed by a guarded expression. You saw them. I'm a nurse. I was checking for other injuries when we first brought you here. Ethan was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the fire. My father, he said finally. He believed in strict discipline. Victor learned from him. The simple statement contained volumes of pain. Clara thought of the photograph of young Ethan with Margaret, the way the woman's hand rested protectively on his shoulder. She'd been trying to shield him even then. I'm sorry, she said, knowing the words were inadequate. Ethan shrugged, a gesture meant to dismiss the subject. It was a long time ago. They finished clearing the dishes in silence, each lost in thought. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling around the cabin's eaves, snow piling against the walls. Inside, the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn beams. May I ask you something, Ethan said suddenly, about the war? Clara tensed slightly but nodded. How did you bear it, seeing so much death, so much suffering? The question caught her off guard. Most people avoided asking about her war experiences, preferring comfortable ignorance to harsh realities. I focused on those I could help, she said after a moment. One patient at a time, one bandage, one stitch, one letter home. She gazed into the fire memories she usually kept carefully locked away, rising to the surface. Some days were harder than others. And afterward, Clara thought of the years since the war, moving from one hospital to another, never staying long, never putting down roots, running though she hadn't recognized it as such until now. I kept moving, she admitted, as if standing still meant facing things I wasn't ready to face. Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. After Sarah died, I wanted to burn everything down. Victor's house, the railroad office, everything. His voice lowered. Some days I still do. What stops you? The knowledge that it wouldn't bring her back, or Margaret. He picked up the pocket watch, turning it over in his hands. And it wouldn't help the women still being brought here. Clara watched him, this man who had lost so much yet still fought for others, who carried scars visible and hidden, yet hadn't surrendered to bitterness or despair. The watch, she said. You mentioned Sarah kept it. Where did she get it? A shadow crossed Ethan's face. She never said exactly, only that she took it from a drunk doctor who was boasting about how he'd accepted it as payment, then never provided the services promised. Clara's heart stuttered. What did he look like? This doctor. Ethan frowned, trying to recall. Tall, thin, a scar along his jaw. Sarah said he worked the mining camps mainly. The description sent a chill through Clara that had nothing to do with the winter storm outside. A tall, thin doctor with a scarred jaw. The very man she'd paid to treat Buthrin, using their father's watch as payment when money proved insufficient. Clara, Ethan was watching, her concern etched on his features. What is it? She swallowed hard. The watch. It might be my father's. The one I sold to pay for Catherine's treatment. Ethan's eyes widened. Are you certain? No, I'd have to see it more closely. There would be an inscription. Her voice trailed off as Ethan handed her the watch. With trembling fingers, Clara opened the case, tilting it toward the light. Inside, the cover barely visible through years of tarnish, time reveals truth. Thomas Wilson. It's his, she whispered. How did it end up here, hundreds of miles from Pennsylvania? Ethan's expression softened. Perhaps Margaret was right. Perhaps there are no accidents. The moment was interrupted by a sound outside, faint, almost lost in the howling wind. A horse's whinny. Ethan was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with a grace that belied his injury. Clara joined him, peering through the frosted glass. Through the falling snow, dark shapes moved at the edge of the clearing. Horses and riders. At least 3. Victor's men, Ethan said grimly, reaching for the rifle propped by the door. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. How did they find us in this storm? They know these mountains better than most. He checked the rifle's ammunition, his movements quick and practiced. We need to leave now. The storm will cover our tracks. Ethan was already gathering essentials, ammunition, food, Margaret's ledgers. There's a root cellar, trap door under the rug. Margaret used it to hide women when necessary. If we can reach it without being seen. Clara moved quickly, gathering her few belongings, the pocket watch secured in her dress pocket. Her mind raced, calculating their chances. The root cellar might offer temporary sanctuary, but they couldn't hide forever. And if they attempted to flee into the storm, the decision was made for them. A heavy knock rattled the cabin door. "Morgan, Poemo," a voice called. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful-like, and nobody gets hurt." Ethan's jaw tightened. He motioned Clara toward the bedroom, mouthing silently, "Trap door, go." Clara shook her head firmly, taking up Margaret's shotgun. She would not hide while Ethan faced danger alone. Another knock, harder this time. "Last chance, Morgan." Ethan's eyes met Clara's apology determination. Something else she couldn't name swirling in their blue depths. Then he moved to the door, rifle ready. "What do you want, Jenkins?" he called. "Just a friendly chat," the voice replied, false amiability dripping from every word. "Your brother's worried about you. What with your injury and all." "My brother tried to have me killed," Ethan responded, voice level. "Forgive me if I doubt his concern." A harsh laugh from outside. "Water under the bridge, Morgan. Family quarrels and all that. Why don't you open up? This storm's a killer." Ethan positioned himself to the side of the door, rifle aimed. To Clara he whispered, 3 men at least. Jenkins in front. He's Victor's foreman. Dangerous. Clara nodded, grip tightening on the shotgun. Her nursing experience had taught her to remain calm in crisis, to focus on the task at hand. Now that task was survival. "I'll need more assurance than your word, Jenkins," Ethan called. "Where's Victor?" "Back in town nursing that shoulder you gave him." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. He hadn't mentioned injuring his brother during their confrontation. "I never shot Victor," he said, a telling pause from outside. Then figure of speech, "Now open up before we break this door down." Ethan shook his head at Clara. Jenkins had revealed more than he intended. Victor was creating a narrative, perhaps claiming Ethan had attacked him rather than the other way around. "I think I'll stay put," Ethan replied. "You boys ride on back to town. Tell Victor if he wants to talk, he can come himself." The response was immediate and violent. Something heavy slammed against the door, a shoulder perhaps, or a booted foot. The wood groaned but held. "Get ready," Ethan whispered to Clara. "When they break through, aim low. We want to wound, not kill." Clara nodded, hard hammering. She had never fired a gun, and anger had spent her life saving lives rather than threatening them. But she understood necessity, understood that sometimes survival required difficult choices. Another crash against the door, wood splintering around the latch. One more blow would break it open. Ethan steadied his rifle. Clara raised the shotgun. The final impact never came. Instead, a new voice called from outside, authoritative, familiar. "Jenkins, what the hell are you doing at my sister's cabin?" "Dr. Edwards." Confusion rippled through the cabin. Ethan and Clara exchanged glances of disbelief. "Doc," Jenkins responded, surprise evident in his voice. "Didn't expect to see you out in this weather." "Clearly." The doctor's tone was cold. "I asked what you're doing here." "Looking for Ethan Morgan. Victor's concerned for his brother's welfare." "Is that why you're breaking down my door?" Dr. Edwards' voice grew closer. Clara could picture him dismounting, approaching the porch with the confidence of righteous anger. "This cabin belongs to my family. You have no right to be here." A murmur of voices outside, Jenkins conferring with his men. "Apologies, Doc," Jenkins finally said, insincerity dripping from every syllable. "Didn't realize this was Morgan property. We'll be on our way." "See that you are," Dr. Edwards replied. "And tell Victor if he has concerns about his brother, he can speak to me directly." Hoofbeats receded into the storm. Only when the sound had faded completely did Ethan lower his rifle, moving to the window to confirm their departure. "They're gone," he reported, relief evident in his voice. "For now." The door opened, admitting Dr. Edwards along with a gust of snow and cold air. The old doctor looked grim, but satisfied, brushing ice from his beard. "That was too close," he said, removing his coat. "Jenkins isn't known for his restraint." "How did you know they'd be here?" Clara asked, lowering the shotgun with shaking hands. "I didn't. I was returning with supplies when I saw their tracks." Dr. Edwards moved to the fire, extending his hands toward the warmth. "They're searching every cabin, every homestead within 20 miles of town." Ethan's expression darkened. "We can't stay. It's not safe for any of us." "Agreed." The doctor reached into his coat withdrawing a folded paper. Which is why I brought this. Map of the old mining tunnels. They run from the North Ridge all the way to the valley floor. Victor's men won't know them. They were abandoned years before the railroad came. Clara studied the map, its lines and markings faded with age. These tunnels, are they stable? Stable enough. Dirk Edwards's confidence wasn't entirely convincing. Margaret used them sometimes to move women without being seen. Ethan took the map, recognition dawning in his eyes. I remember. Sarah mentioned them once. He traced a path with his finger. This one leads toward Helena eventually, but it's a hard journey, especially in winter. The doctor's gaze moved between Ethan and Clara. You'll need supplies, proper clothing, and a guide. A guide? Clara questioned. Someone who knows the tunnels. Dr. Edwards hesitated. I'd go myself, but you're needed here, Ethan finished for him, to help the other women. The doctor nodded, relief evident in his expression. There's a man lives in a cabin near the North Tunnel entrance. Ezra Fisher, prospector, knows these mountains better than anyone. Margaret trusted him. Can we trust him? Clara asked. With your lives. Dr. Edwards' tone allowed no argument. He helped Sarah more than once. The decision formed between them without further discussion. They would leave at nightfall using the storm's cover to reach the tunnels, find this Ezra Fisher, make their way to Helena, to safety, to justice. As Clara packed what few supplies they could carry, her hands brushed against her father's watch, now returned to her through twists of fate she could never have imagined. Time reveals truth, the inscription read. Perhaps it was revealing hers that she wasn't meant to be James Westbrook's mail-order bride, but something else entirely. A woman with purpose. A fighter like Margaret, like Sarah, like the person she'd been before grief and war had hollowed her out. Night fell early, hastened by the storm's heavy clouds. Dr. Edwards would accompany them partway to the tunnel entrance before returning to town to maintain his vigil there. His presence in Willow Creek was too important to the network Margaret had built. Without him, many more women would be lost. As they prepared to depart, Clara took one last look around the cabin at the rocking chair where she'd spent so many hours, the hearth that had provided warmth and comfort, the bed where Ethan had begun his recovery. In just days, this place had become more of a home to her than anywhere she'd been since the war began. Ready? Ethan asked softly, appearing at her side. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He seemed to understand, his hand finding hers briefly, a gentle squeeze, conveying what words could not. Together they stepped into the storm, into uncertainty, into whatever fate awaited them beyond the cabin's sheltering walls. The world had been reduced to white fury, snow-driven horizontal by relentless wind, biting exposed skin like tiny shards of glass. They moved in single file, Dr. Edwards leading Ethan next, then Clara, each clinging to the person ahead to avoid separation in the blinding storm. Clara had lost all sense of direction of time. Her face was numb, fingers aching despite woolen gloves. The only reality was the next step, then the next. Ethan's broad back before her, a constant reassuring presence. When the doctor finally stopped, Clara nearly collided with Ethan. They stood at the base of a rocky outcropping, sheltered somewhat from the wind's full force. There! Dr. Edwards shouted over the storm, pointing to a dark opening barely visible against the granite face. The tunnel entrance. Relief flooded through Clara as they stumbled toward it, out of the wind at last. Inside, the sudden silence was almost disorienting. The air smelled of earth and minerals, cool but not as bitterly cold as outside. Dr. Edwards lit a small lantern. He'd carried its warm glow, revealing rough-hewn walls supported by ancient timbers. The tunnel stretched ahead, disappearing into darkness. Fisher's cabin is 2 miles along this passage, then up through the ventilation shaft. The doctor explained, voice echoing slightly. He'll be expecting you. I sent word through the network. Ethan clasped the old man's shoulder. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet, Edwards replied grimly. You still have a long journey ahead, and Victor won't stop looking. We'll be careful, Clara promised. The doctor turned to her, studying her face in the lantern light. You're stronger than you know, Miss Wilson. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small package wrapped in oilcloth. Medicine for Ethan's wound. Change the dressing daily if you can. Clara accepted it with a nod of thanks, tucking it securely into her coat. I should return before the storm worsens. Dr. Edwards said, though how conditions could possibly deteriorate further seemed unimaginable to Clara. Goodbyes were brief. None of them had the luxury of lingering. The doctor extracted a promise that they would send word once they reached Helena safely. Then he was gone, swallowed by the howling white void beyond the tunnel entrance. Alone now, Ethan and Clara stood in the lantern's small circle of light, the enormity of their undertaking settling over them. "We should move," Ethan said, finally taking the lantern. "It's a long walk to Fisher's cabin." The tunnel was a strange world unto itself, timeless, unchanging, isolated from the storm raging above. Their footsteps echoed against stone, the lantern casting grotesque shadows that danced along rough walls. Occasionally they passed side passages, darker veins branching from the main artery, leading to forgotten digs and abandoned hopes. "These mines," Clara asked as they walked, seeking distraction from the oppressive darkness. "What were they searching for?" "Silver mostly," Ethan replied. "Some gold. The boom ended before I was born. By the time the railroad came, these tunnels were already forgotten." He paused. "Except by Margaret." A small smile touched his lips, visible in profile by the lantern light. "My aunt had a gift for seeing value in things others discarded." They continued in companionable silence, conserving their strength. The tunnel gradually sloped upward, the air growing fresher, suggesting they were nearing a ventilation shaft. Clara's legs ached, unused to such extended exertion. Her practical nurse's shoes were not designed for miles of walking on uneven stone. Still, she pressed on, without complaint, driven by the knowledge that each step took them further from danger, from Victor Morgan and his men. "There," Ethan said, eventually holding the lantern higher. Ahead, a wooden ladder rose through an opening in the ceiling, disappearing into darkness. The ventilation shaft. Fisher's cabin should be just above. Clara eyed the ladder dubiously. Its rungs looked ancient, the wood dried and cracked with age. "I'll go first," Ethan offered, handing her the lantern. "Test each rung. Your wound has barely healed enough." His tone broke no argument. "If the ladder will hold me, it will certainly hold you." She couldn't fault his logic, though concern still furrowed her brow as he began to climb. Each rung creaked alarmingly under his weight, but held. Clara followed the lantern swinging from her wrist, casting wild shadows across the shaft's narrow confines. The climb seemed endless, the shaft stretching upward like a chimney through solid rock. By the time Clara's head bumped against a wooden trap door, her arms trembled with exertion. Ethan pushed against the trap door. For a heart-stopping moment, it refused to budge. Then with a groan of protesting hinges, it lifted, admitting a rush of fresh air and the soft glow of firelight. A weathered face appeared in the opening. A man in his 60s with a silver beard and eyes sharp as flint. "About time you arrived," he said gruffly. "Storm's getting worse. Thought I might have to come looking for you." "Ezra Fisher," Ethan asked, hauling himself through the opening. "Who else would be fool enough to live on out here?" Fisher extended a gnarled hand to Clara, helping her up with surprising strength. "You must be the nurse Doc Edwards mentioned." Clara nodded, too breathless from the climb to speak. Fisher's cabin was a small but well-maintained, its single room dominated by a stone fireplace where flames danced merrily. Furs covered the plank floor, shelves lined the walls, jars of preserved food, books, mining equipment, all neatly arranged. "Sit," Fisher instructed, gesturing to chairs near the fire. "You look half frozen." They didn't argue, gratefully sinking into the offered seats. Fisher busied himself at a pot hanging over the fire, ladling steaming liquid into tin cups. "Venison stew," he explained, handing them each a cup. "Not fancy, but it'll warm you." The stew was indeed warming, rich with wild onions and herbs Clara couldn't identify. She sipped gratefully, feeling life flow back into her chilled limbs. "Doc says you're heading to Helena," Fisher said, settling into a chair across from them. "Looking for the federal marshal." Ethan nodded. "I have evidence against Victor Morgan. Railroad corruption, land fraud, trafficking women." Fisher's weathered face hardened. "About time someone stood against that snake." He studied Ethan with renewed interest. "You're Margaret's nephew, the one who married Sarah." "Yes. Good women, both of them." Fisher's gaze shifted to Clara. "And you? How do you fit into this?" Clara hesitated, unsure how to explain her presence. She wasn't family, wasn't part of the network, just a woman who had answered a false advertisement and then who had saved a wounded man who had somehow become entangled in a fight that wasn't originally hers. "I'm a nurse," she said finally. "I found Ethan after he was shot. The rest happened." Fisher seemed to accept this explanation, nodding thoughtfully. "Life has a way of putting us where we're needed, not where we plan to be." He rose, moving to a trunk in the corner. "You'll need supplies for the journey. Proper clothes, food. The tunnels are cold, and it's 3 days to Helena if the weather holds." "We can pay," Ethan began, but Fisher waved him off. "I owed Margaret my life," he said simply, "and Sarah saved my daughter from Victor's camp 2 years back. I don't need payment." As Fisher sorted through the trunk, pulling out heavy coats, boots, provisions, Clara leaned closer to Ethan. "His daughter," she whispered. "Many of the women Elizabeth and Sarah helped weren't strangers," Ethan explained quietly. "They were local girls, daughters of miners and settlers. Victor's reach is long in this valley." The revelation added another layer to Clara's understanding of the situation, the web of corruption and fear that Victor Morgan had woven throughout Willow Creek. "You should rest," Fisher announced, interrupting her thoughts. "Head out at first light. The storm should break by then." Rest was indeed welcome. Fisher insisted Ethan take the bed, citing his injury, while Clara and Fisher would sleep in chairs by the fire. Despite his protest that he was fully recovered, Ethan's pallor, and the careful way he held himself, spoke of pain he wouldn't acknowledge. As night deepened, Fisher's gentle snores soon filled the cabin. Clara remained awake, watching the fire's dying embers, mind too full for sleep, despite her body's exhaustion. "You should rest." Ethan's voice came softly from the darkness. She turned to find him, watching her propped on one elbow in the bed. "So should you," she countered. A smile ghosted across his face. "Difficult to sleep when the world is shifting under your feet." Clara understood his meaning all too well. In days, their lives had transformed completely. Danger, purpose, unexpected connections forged in crisis. "What will you do?" she asked. "After Helena, after Victor is brought to justice." Ethan was silent for a long moment, considering. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "For so long, stopping Victor has been my only goal." He paused. "What about you? Will you return east?" The question caught Clara off guard. She hadn't considered her future beyond their immediate survival, beyond reaching Helena with Ethan's evidence. "I don't know," she said honestly. "There's nothing for me in Pennsylvania. Not anymore." Silence settled between them, comfortable rather than awkward. Outside, the wind continued its mournful howl, a counterpoint to the crackling fire. "Whatever happens," Ethan said finally, his voice low, "I'm grateful our paths crossed, Clara Wilson." The simple sincerity in his words touched something deep within her, a place she'd thought long closed, sealed by grief and the horrors of war. "So am I," she whispered. Morning arrived with unexpected clarity, the storm having spent its fury overnight. Sunlight streamed through Fisher's small windows, revealing a world transformed. Trees bowed under the weight of snow, the landscape a blinding expanse of white, unmarred by tracks or signs of human presence. They prepared quickly, donning the warmer clothing. Fisher provided packing supplies into oilcloth bundles that could be carried easily through the tunnels. Fisher would guide them part of the way to where the main tunnel branched toward Helena. "The passage is clear for the most part," he explained as they made ready to depart. "Occasional cave-ins, but there are always ways around. Follow the air. If you can breathe easy, you're on the right track." As Fisher lifted the trapdoor to the ventilation shaft, a sound froze them all in place. The distant but unmistakable bark of a hound. "Tracking dogs," Fisher said grimly. "Victor's men must have followed your trail from the cabin." Ethan's expression hardened. "Not in that storm. Dogs don't need to see tracks. They follow scent." Fisher moved quickly to the window, peering out. "Can't see them yet, but they're coming." Clara's heart raced. "The tunnel. Dogs will follow your scent right to the trap door," Fisher interrupted. "We need to split up. Give them multiple trails to follow." "No," Ethan objected immediately. "Too dangerous." Fisher ignored him, gathering additional supplies. "I'll lead them west toward the old Blackwood mine. You two head east through the tunnels, then surface at Devil's Gulch. There's a trapper cabin there, abandoned but serviceable. Rest one night, then continue to Helena." "They'll kill you if they catch you," Clara protested. A fierce grin split Fisher's silver beard. "Been playing hide and seek with Victor Morgan for years, miss. I know these mountains better than he ever will." The dogs' barking grew louder, joined now by the sound of men's voices. They were running out of time. Go, Fisher urged, practically pushing them toward the trap door. Stay off the main trails. Trust no one until you reach Marshal Sullivan. Ethan clasped the older man's hand firmly. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just make sure Victor pays for what he's done. Fisher's eyes were flint hard. For Margaret, for Sarah, for all of them. Clara descended the ladder first, heart pounding against her ribs. Ethan followed, pulling the trap door closed behind them. The shaft plunged into darkness, broken only by the small lantern Fisher had pressed into Clara's hands at the last moment. They descended in silence, urgency, lending speed to their movements. At the tunnel floor, Ethan consulted the map Dr. Edwards had provided, orienting himself. This one, he said, pointing east. Devil's Gulch is about 10 miles through these passages. 10 miles of darkness, of damp stone walls and ancient timbers, of listening for sounds of pursuit. Clara squared her shoulders, adjusting her pack. Then we better start walking. Time lost meaning in the tunnel's unchanging darkness. They walked for what seemed hours, the lantern's glow. Their only guide, the map, their only reassurance that they weren't simply wandering deeper into the Earth's embrace. Occasionally, they paused to rest, to sip water from canteens, to share the jerky and hard biscuits Fisher had provided. During these brief respites, they spoke little, conserving energy ears, straining for sounds of pursuit. But the tunnels remained silent, save for the occasional drip of water from stone ceilings and their own footsteps echoing against rock walls. Do you think Fisher escaped? Clara asked during one such rest, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Ethan considered, his face shadowed in the lantern light. If anyone could evade Victor's men, it's him. Margaret trusted him for good reason. The mention of Margaret brought questions to Clara's lips about Ethan's childhood, about the aunt who had clearly shaped so much of his life. But before she could speak, a distant sound reached them, faint but unmistakable. Dogs barking. Ethan extinguished the lantern, immediately plunging them into absolute darkness. Clara felt his hand find hers, gripping tightly. They're in the tunnels, he whispered, voice barely audible. Clara's pulse roared in her ears, fear a metallic taste on her tongue. In the pitch blackness, her other senses heightened: the smell of damp earth, the cold stone beneath her palm, Ethan's breath close to her ear. How far behind? She whispered back. Can't tell. Sound carries strangely down here. His hand tightened on hers. We need to move. Quickly, follow the right wall, blind. They pressed forward, one hand on the rough tunnel wall, the other extended before them to prevent collision with unseen obstacles. Progress was agonizingly slow, each step a careful negotiation with the darkness. The barking grew louder, echoing confusingly from all directions. With it came men's voices, the glow of distant lanterns reflecting faintly against the tunnel walls. Here, Ethan whispered, suddenly pulling Clara into what felt like a side passage. Stay low. They crouched in the smaller tunnel, barely breathing, as light grew stronger in the main passage. The dogs' excited barking echoed painfully in the confined space. They've lost the scent, a man's voice announced, frustration evident. Damn waters washed it away. Keep looking, another commanded. Victor wants Morgan found today. These tunnels go for miles. We could search for weeks. Then you better hope we find him before then. Victor's not known for his patience. Footsteps approached their hiding place. Clara pressed herself against the wall, Ethan's arm protectively across her shoulders. The lantern light grew brighter, nearly reaching their position. Then mercifully it receded. The men continued down the main tunnel, dogs straining at their leashes, handlers cursing the damp conditions that diluted scent. Only when the light had faded completely, the voices no more than distant murmurs, did Clara release the breath she'd been holding. Beside her, Ethan's tension eased marginally. That was close, she whispered. Too close. He shifted, his breath warm against her cheek in the darkness. We can't go back to the main tunnel. They'll have men watching it now. Then where? Ethan was silent for a moment, thinking. This side passage. It might connect to the eastern tunnels eventually. It's a risk, but less of one than running into Victor's men. A risk indeed. The side passage was smaller, its timbers older, less maintained, but they had little choice. Lead on, Clara said, summoning courage she wasn't entirely sure she possessed. They continued in darkness, unwilling to risk the lantern with the Victor's men, potentially still within sight of its glow. The tunnel narrowed further, ceiling lowering until they were forced to stoop. The air grew staler, raising concerns about ventilation. Just as Clara began to wonder if they'd made a terrible mistake, her outstretched hand met empty air rather than stone wall. "It opens up," she whispered excitedly. "There's a larger chamber ahead." Relief flooded through Ethan's voice. "Good. We can risk the lantern there. Check the map." The chamber proved to be an old mining operation equipment, long abandoned, still scattered about pickaxes and shovels crusted with decades of mineral deposits. Timber supports creaked ominously overhead, but the space was large enough that they could stand upright, a luxury after hours of crouching. Ethan relit the lantern, its warm glow revealing their surroundings in greater detail. Ore carts sat on rusted rails, their contents long since removed. Crude workbenches lined one wall, tools still laid out, as if the miners had simply stepped away for a moment intending to return. "Silver mine," Ethan observed, examining the veins of ore still visible in the walls, "played out before the big strike further west." Clara was more concerned with their location than mining history. "Can you find us on the map?" Ethan spread the parchment on a relatively clean section of workbench, studying it intently. His finger traced their probable route, brow furrowed in concentration. "We're here, I think," he said, finally indicating a section marked North Star Claim. "Devil's Gulch should be." His finger moved eastward. "Here, but I don't see a connecting tunnel." Clara's heart sank. "So we're lost." "Not lost, just," Ethan searched for a more optimistic assessment, "temporarily uncertain of our exact route." Despite their precarious situation, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. "Is that what they taught you at the Morgan dinner table? How to make dire circumstances sound merely inconvenient?" Ethan looked up, surprised by her teasing tone, then smiled in return. "Actually, yes. My father had a talent for understatement. Slightly concerning financial matters meant bankruptcy was imminent." The brief moment of levity eased some of the tension that had built during their flight through the tunnels. Clara found herself studying Ethan's face in the lantern light, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, rare as that expression was. "We'll find a way," she said with more confidence than she felt. "There must be a connection somewhere." Ethan nodded, folding the map carefully. "We'll follow this chamber to its end. See where the rails lead. Mining operations always had multiple exits. Safety precaution." As they gathered their supplies, preparing to continue, a low rumble vibrated through the chamber. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, timbers groaning in protest. "What was that?" Clara asked, alarm sharpening her voice. Ethan's expression was grim. "Cave-in, somewhere nearby." He glanced at the ceiling uneasily. "These old supports haven't been maintained in decades." Another rumble, louder this time. A timber cracked ominously overhead. "We need to move," Ethan said urgently, grabbing their packs. "Now, Lou!" They ran, following the rusted rails deeper into the chamber as the ceiling began to collapse behind them. Rocks and earth thundered down, filling the passage they'd entered, through dust billowing and choking clouds. Clara stumbled. Ethan's hand on her arm was the only thing keeping her upright. As they fled the collapsing section, the lantern swung wildly, casting frantic shadows across the walls. "There!" Ethan shouted over the din, pointing to an opening ahead. Another tunnel. They dove through just as the chamber ceiling gave way completely. Darkness enveloped them, punctuated only by the continuing rumble of falling rock. Clara pressed her face into Ethan's shoulder, coughing as dust filled her lungs. When the noise finally subsided, they found themselves in yet another tunnel, this one clearly different from those they'd traversed before. The walls were smoother, the floor more even. "It's a drainage tunnel," Ethan observed, holding the lantern higher. "See how it slopes? It must lead to the surface somewhere." Relief washed through Clara. Surface means Devil's Gulch. Maybe we're not lost after all. They followed the drainage tunnel for what seemed hours, its gentle slope gradually becoming more pronounced. The air grew fresher, a promising sign. When they finally glimpsed natural light ahead, a silvery rectangle against the darkness, Clara could have wept with relief. The tunnel ended in a small waterfall, frozen now in winter's grip, a crystalline cascade suspended in time. Beyond stretched a narrow gulch, its steep walls rising toward a strip of blue sky overhead. "Devil's Gulch," Ethan confirmed, consulting the map one last time. Fisher's cabin should be about a mile downstream. They emerged cautiously, blinking in the bright winter sunlight after so many hours underground. The gulch was silent save for the occasional crack of ice or whisper of wind through bare branches. No sign of pursuit, no barking dogs or shouting men. For the moment at least they were safe. The trapper's cabin Fisher had mentioned proved to be little more than a sturdy shack nestled against the gulch wall, partially hidden by pine trees. Its single room held a stone fireplace, a narrow cot, and little else. But after their ordeal in the tunnels, it seemed luxurious. Ethan built a fire while Clara took stock of their supplies. Fisher had packed well enough food for several days' medical supplies, even a change of clothing for each of them. The old prospector had clearly anticipated their needs with remarkable foresight. As warmth gradually filled the cabin, Clara found herself watching Ethan, the careful way he tended the fire lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the determination that seemed to radiate from him despite their desperate circumstances. "You should rest," she said gently. "I'll keep watch." He looked up, about to protest, then nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her suggestion. "Wake me in a few hours. We'll leave at dawn tomorrow." Clara settled by the window as Ethan stretched out on the cot, his breathing soon evening into sleep. Outside, shadows lengthened across the snow as the afternoon faded toward evening. The gulch remained peaceful, undisturbed. She withdrew her father's pocket watch from her coat, opening it to check the time. The inscription caught the fading light. "Time reveals truth." How strange, she thought, that this small piece of her past had found its way back to her, carried by Sarah Morgan, a woman she would never meet, but whose legacy she now helped protect. Truth was indeed being revealed about Victor Morgan's corruption, about the women lured to Willow Creek, with false promises about her own capacity for courage she'd thought lost on blood-soaked battlefields. And perhaps most unexpectedly, about the possibility of beginning anew, of finding purpose and connection when she'd least expected it. As night settled over Devil's Gulch, Clara Wilson watched the stars emerge one by one above the narrow strip of sky visible between the gulch walls. Tomorrow they would continue to Helena, to the federal marshal, to whatever justice could be found for Margaret, for Sarah, for all those Victor Morgan had harmed. But tonight, in this moment of hard-won peace, she allowed herself to hope for the future, for herself, for the man sleeping behind her whose path had so unexpectedly intertwined with her own. Outside, snow began to fall, once more gentle now, rather than the raging storm of the previous night. Inside, the fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over two souls united by circumstance, by purpose, by something neither was yet ready to name, but both increasingly felt. A fragile beginning, perhaps, but a beginning nonetheless. Dawn broke over Devil's Gulch in watercolor strokes of pink and gold, the rising sun casting long shadows across pristine snow. Clara stood at the cabin's threshold, breath clouding in the crisp morning air, watching as the world awakened around them. The night had passed without incident, no sign of Victor's men, no baying hounds, just the profound silence of wilderness and winter. Behind her, Ethan stirred, rising from the narrow cot with the careful movements of a man still mindful of healing wounds. He joined her at the door, surveying the gulch with wary eyes that missed nothing. "It's beautiful," Clara said softly, reluctant to break the morning's tranquility. Ethan nodded his shoulder, brushing hers in the doorway. "My father used to say Montana had two faces, one that could kill you without mercy, one that could make you forget the first. Which are we seeing now?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. Perhaps both. They prepared for departure with practiced efficiency, gathering their supplies, ensuring no trace of their presence would remain. Helena was still a day's journey away, across mountains, through forests skirting settlements where Victor's influence might reach. "The main trail follows the creek," Ethan explained, consulting the map one final time. "But it's too exposed. We'll take the ridge path." Clara studied the route he indicated, a thin line tracing the contours of steep hillsides, far more challenging than the valley floor, but offering better concealment. "Is it safe?" she asked, thinking of avalanches of treacherous footing on snow-covered slopes. "Safer than encountering Victor's men." Ethan folded the map, tucking it securely into his coat. "The ridge connects to an old trapper's route that leads directly to Helena's outskirts. If we push hard, we can reach the city by nightfall." With one last glance at the cabin that had sheltered them, they set out into the winter morning. The climb to the ridge was arduous, powdery snow, concealing rocky footing, the thin air at higher elevation, making each breath a conscious effort. Clara's legs burned with exertion, but she pressed forward without complaint, keeping pace with Ethan's steady stride. At the crest, they paused the panorama before them, momentarily banishing thoughts of pursuit of danger. Below stretched the valley in pristine white, bordered by mountains that seemed to touch the very sky. In the far distance, barely visible, smoke rose from what must be Helena's chimneys. "We'll make it," Ethan said, the words part statement, part promise. Clara nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. They had come too far to fail now. Not with justice for Margaret and Sarah so close at hand. Not with the evidence that could end Victor Morgan's reign of corruption almost within reach. The ridge path proved as challenging as it appeared narrow in places, sometimes disappearing entirely beneath wind-blown snow, requiring careful navigation. They walked in single file, Ethan leading, occasionally extending a hand back to steady Clara on particularly treacherous sections. By midday, clouds had gathered, the sun disappearing behind a gray veil that threatened more snow. The temperature dropped perceptibly, wind picking up, carrying the promise of storm. "We need to move faster," Ethan said, concern evident in his voice. "If this storm hits before we reach Helena—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Being caught in the open during a Montana blizzard was tantamount to a death sentence. They quickened their pace as much as safety allowed, stopping only briefly to share a cold meal of jerky and hard biscuits. As they ate, Ethan's gaze continually scanned their surroundings, alert for any sign of pursuit. "Do you think they're still following?" Clara asked, flexing fingers stiff with cold. "Victor doesn't give up easily," Ethan replied. "If not his men, then others. He has connections throughout the territory, ranch hands, miners, men who owe him favors or fear his influence. And in Helena, will we be safe there?" A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "The marshal is beyond Victor's reach. But getting to him—" He left the sentence unfinished, a tacit acknowledgement of the challenges still ahead. They continued along the ridge as afternoon waned, the promised storm advancing from the west, a dark wall of clouds that devoured the horizon. Wind gusted stronger now, driving needles of ice against exposed skin. Clara pulled her scarf higher, grateful for the heavy coat Fisher had provided. Just as the first snowflakes began to fall, the ridge path descended sharply, merging with the trapper's route Ethan had mentioned. The trail here was better defined, cutting through dense pine forest that offered some shelter from the strengthening storm. "How much further?" Clara asked, voice nearly lost in the wind. 3, maybe 4 miles, Ethan answered, squinting through the thickening snowfall. "We need to hurry." They pushed forward with renewed urgency, the storm intensifying around them. Snow fell in earnest now, reducing visibility to mere yards, the wind howling through pine boughs overhead. Clara focused on Ethan's back, on placing one foot before the other, on simply continuing forward, despite the growing certainty that the storm would overtake them before they reached Helena. When the gunshot came, it seemed at first merely another sound in the tempest, a sharp crack barely distinguishable from breaking branches under snow's weight. It was Ethan's reaction that alerted Clara, his sudden halt, the way he spun toward her, eyes wide with alarm. "Down!" he shouted, lunging toward her as a second shot splintered bark from a tree inches from where she stood. They tumbled into snow, Ethan's body partially covering hers, his breath warm against her cheek as he spoke urgently. "Shoot her on the ridge. We need cover." Heart pounding, Clara peered through swirling snow, trying to locate their attacker. The ridge loomed indistinct through the storm, offering no glimpse of whoever sought their lives. Another shot closer this time. Ethan pulled her deeper into the trees, away from the path, using the forest's density as shield against bullets and visibility alike. "Victor's men," Clara gasped, struggling through knee-deep snow. "Has to be," Ethan replied grimly. "They must have guessed our route." They ran as best they could, the thick forest both hindrance and protection. Behind them, shouts carried faintly through the storm. Multiple voices, confirmation that they faced more than a single pursuer. There, Ethan pointed to a jumble of massive boulders ahead, half buried in snow, forming a natural fortress. "We can defend that position." They reached the rocks just as another volley of shots peppered the trees around them. Scrambling over snow-slicked stone, they found shelter in a narrow space between 2 boulders, protected on 3 sides with clear view of the approaching forest. Ethan unslung the rifle from his back, checking its loading with practiced hands. 6 shots, he murmured. "Make them count." Clara withdrew the revolver Dr. Edwards had pressed upon her before their departure from the cabin, a small weapon but deadly at close range. She'd never fired it at a person, had carried it primarily as reassurance. Now it seemed reassurance would become necessity. "How many?" she asked, peering through the thickening snow. "Can't tell. 3 at least, maybe more. Ethan positioned himself at the edge of their shelter, rifle ready. When I fire, move to the other side. Don't give them a stationary target. Clara nodded, mouth dry with fear, yet mind remarkably clear. The battlefield had taught her this, how terror could sharpen focus rather than shatter it, how the body could function despite the mind's screaming awareness of mortality. Shadows moved through the trees, men advancing cautiously using trunks for cover as they approached the boulders. Ethan's rifle cracked, the sound startlingly loud in their stone shelter. A shout of pain confirmed his aim had found its mark. Left side, he directed tersely, and Clara scrambled across their small space, positioning herself to cover the approach from that direction. A figure emerged from the swirling snow, rifle raised. Clara fired without hesitation, the revolver's recoil jarring her wrist. The man fell, clutching his leg, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the air. "Good shot," Ethan said, genuine approval in his voice. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, bullets ricocheting off stone with metallic whines. They pressed themselves lower, using the boulder's natural contours for maximum protection. "They're trying to pin us down," Ethan observed, waiting for reinforcements, or for the storm to do their work for them. The realization chilled Clara more thoroughly than the snow seeping through her clothing. If they remained here, the Montana winter would claim them as surely as Victor's bullets. If they fled, they'd be exposed to easy targets in the open. "We need a diversion," she said, mind racing through possibilities. Ethan's eyes met hers, a plan already forming in his expression. "The gulch. It's about 50 yards east. If we can reach it, we can follow it all the way to Helena's outskirts." "How do we get there without being shot?" He hesitated, clearly reluctant to voice his idea. "One of us creates a diversion, the other makes a run for the gulch." "No." Clara's refusal was immediate, emphatic. "We stay together." "Clara, we stay together," she repeated firmly. "Find another way." For a moment he looked as though he might argue further. Then his expression softened into something like admiration. "All right," he conceded. "Together." Another volley of shots peppered their shelter, closer this time, suggesting their pursuers were maneuvering for better positions. Time was running short. "The storm," Clara said suddenly. "It's getting worse. Visibility is almost zero. If we both go now, stay low." Ethan considered, then nodded. "On my signals, head east, straight for the gulch. Don't stop. Don't look back." He fired 2 rapid shots into the trees, then another in the opposite direction, creating momentary confusion about their position. Then, with a nod to Clara, they broke from cover together, running east through deepening snow. Shots followed, but blind their attackers, firing at sounds rather than sights in the howling storm. Clara ran as she'd never run before, lungs burning, legs protesting, Ethan close beside her. The gulch appeared suddenly, a sharp drop-off hidden by the storm, until they were nearly upon it. Ethan caught her arm, preventing her from tumbling over the edge. The gulch was deeper than expected, its sides steep but navigable. Without hesitation, they half climbed, half slid down the snow-covered slope, the wind's howl covering any sounds of their descent. At the bottom, partially sheltered from the storm by the gulch's high walls, they paused to catch their breath. No shouts followed them, no gunfire. Their pursuers had lost them, at least temporarily. "Helena!" Clara gasped, still breathless from their flight. Ethan nodded, pointing downstream. "The gulch leads directly to the city's north side. Maybe 2 miles. 2 miles. It seemed both impossibly distant and tantalizingly close. Safety, justice, the end of their desperate flight, all just 2 miles away. They set off along the gulch floor, the narrow space channeling the wind into a constant, mournful wail. Snow fell heavier now, accumulating rapidly, making each step an effort. Cold seeped through layers of clothing, numbing extremities, slowing movements. Clara focused on Ethan's back, on the rhythm of placing one foot before the other, on the promise of warmth and safety ahead. When he stumbled, she steadied him. When her own strength faltered, his hand found hers, squeezing encouragement. Together they pressed on through the heart of the storm. Helena materialized from the whiteout like a mirage. First a glow, then indistinct shapes, finally resolving into buildings, streets, the tangible reality of civilization. They emerged from the gulch as dusk approached the storm, showing no signs of abating, the city's lights blurred by curtains of falling snow. Ethan led them toward a modest hotel on a side street away from Helena's more populous areas, where Victor's influence might reach. The lobby was blessedly warm, the clerk's curious glance at their snow-covered appearance quickly softened by Ethan's explanation of being caught in the storm while traveling. The room was simple, a bed, a washstand, a small fireplace, already laid with wood. Ethan lit the fire while Clara hung their wet outer garments to dry, both moving with the mechanical efficiency of exhaustion. Only when warmth began to seep back into their chilled bodies did the reality of their situation fully register. They had made it to Helena. They had escaped Victor's men, survived the tunnels, the mountain crossing, the storm, the ambush. They were alive. Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, the enormity of what they'd endured washing over her in a wave that left her trembling. Ethan knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. "We made it," he said softly, his voice steadying her. "You were incredible out there." She managed to smile, though tears threatened. "So were you." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms, warming them. "First thing tomorrow, we'll go to Marshal Sullivan. Present the evidence. End this." The evidence. In the chaos of their flight, Clara had almost forgotten the purpose behind it all. The documents proving Victor Morgan's corruption, his trafficking of women, his illegal land deals with the railroad. "Where is it?" she asked suddenly. "The evidence." Ethan reached inside his shirt, withdrawing a small oilskin packet secured with twine. "Here. Records of every transaction, every deal. Names, dates, amounts. Everything needed to bring Victor down." He returned the packet to its hiding place close to his heart, where it had remained throughout their journey. Tomorrow it would serve its purpose: justice for Margaret, for Sarah, for all those Victor had harmed. "You should rest," Ethan said, rising from his kneeling position. "Take the bed. I'll keep watch." Clara shook her head. "You need rest too. We both do." She gestured to the bed, ample enough for two. "We can share. We're both adults." A hint of color touched Ethan's cheeks, but he nodded. "Of course." They settled on opposite sides of the bed, still fully clothed, save for their boots. The fire's warmth gradually thawed their chilled bodies. Despite her exhaustion, Clara found sleep elusive, her mind replaying the day's events, calculating what tomorrow might bring. "Ethan," she whispered, unsure if he was still awake. "Yes." His response came immediately, suggesting he too found rest difficult to capture. "What happens after Victor is brought to justice? After all this is over?" Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling fire and the storm's muffled howl beyond the window. "I haven't thought much beyond tomorrow," he admitted finally. "For so long, stopping Victor has been my only goal." "You'll inherit the Morgan property," she pointed out. "The ranch, the land." "Land soaked in blood," Ethan said softly. "Margaret's, Sarah's, countless others." Clara turned on her side, facing him, though the room's dimness revealed only his profile. "Land that could be reclaimed, used for good." He was quiet again, considering. "Perhaps," he conceded. "Sarah once talked about turning the ranch into a sanctuary of sorts, a place for women who needed somewhere safe to start over." The idea resonated within Clara, a place of new beginnings, of healing. Something built from the ashes of tragedy, a monument not to what was lost but to what might yet be. "That sounds beautiful," she said. Ethan turned to face her, their eyes meeting in the fire-lit darkness. "Would you, he began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Would I what?" she prompted gently. "Stay," he finished simply. "Help make it real." The invitation caught her off guard. Not its existence, but the realization of how deeply she wanted to accept it. In the space of days, her life had transformed completely. The woman who had stepped off the train in Willow Creek, seeking a marriage of convenience with a man who didn't exist, had found something far different, far more profound. Purpose, connection, perhaps in time, even love. "Yes," she whispered, "I would stay." Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Relief, joy, tentative hope. He reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers atop the blanket. Nothing more was said. Nothing more needed to be. In the quiet of their shared sanctuary, a storm raged outside and fire burned within. A future began to take shape, unspoken, but increasingly real. As they drifted towards sleep, hands still joined between them, Clara felt a certainty she hadn't known since before the war. Tomorrow would bring challenges, confrontation, the culmination of their dangerous journey. But for the first time in years, she faced the future not with resignation, but with hope. Outside, Helena slumbered beneath the storm's white mantle. Inside their small room, Clara and Ethan slept two souls found in the wreckage of broken promises, united by purpose, by justice, by the possibility of what might come after the storm. In her dreams, Clara saw Margaret's cabin rebuilt, filled with light and life. She saw women finding safety there as she had. She saw Ethan's scars healed, burden lifted. She saw herself no longer running from the past, but building a future. And through it all, her father's watch ticked steadily. Time reveals truth. Indeed it did. Morning arrived with startling clarity, the storm having passed during the night, leaving Helena transformed by pristine snow and brilliant sunshine. They rose early, preparing with the solemn purposefulness of those about to complete a long-sought mission. The federal marshal's office was located in a sturdy brick building near the center of town, the American flag above its entrance, snapping in the crisp morning breeze. Ethan paused on the sidewalk opposite, surveying the building with the wariness of a man who had learned the hard way that safety was never guaranteed. "It looks clear," he said finally. No sign of Victor's men or other threats apparent. They crossed the street together, snow crunching beneath their boots, breath clouding in the cold air. Inside, a clerk directed them to Marshal Sullivan's office, his curious glance suggesting visitors from the mountains were uncommon, especially ones as trail-worn as they appeared. Marshal Sullivan proved to be a man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen enough of humanity's darker aspects to be wary but not yet cynical. He listened without interruption as Ethan explained their journey, their purpose, the evidence they carried. When Ethan placed the oilskin packet on the marshal's desk, unwrapping it to reveal Ledger's correspondence contracts, the older man's expression hardened. "Victor Morgan," he said, examining the documents. "I've heard rumors about his operations for years, nothing concrete enough to act on." He looked up, studying Ethan intently. "Until now." "There's more," Ethan said. "Women trafficked under false pretenses, land stolen from legitimate settlers, murder." "Margaret Morgan," the marshal said, surprising them both, "and Sarah Morgan, both ruled accidents by the local authorities." "They weren't accidents." Ethan's voice was tight with controlled emotion. "Victor had them killed because they were helping women escape from his operation." Marshal Sullivan nodded slowly, continuing to examine the evidence. "This is comprehensive," he acknowledged. "Names, dates, amounts, enough to bring charges, federal charges." Relief washed through Clara. The marshal believed them. The evidence was sufficient. Justice would finally come for Margaret, for Sarah, for all those Victor had harmed. "There's something else you should know," the marshal added, his expression grave. "Victor Morgan arrived in Helena yesterday with several men." The news hit like a physical blow. Victor was here in Helena. Their sanctuary wasn't as secure as they'd believed. "How?" Ethan demanded. "In that storm. Arrived before it hit, apparently. Checking into the Grand Hotel with several associates." Marshal Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "Claims he's here on railroad business." "He's looking for us," Clara said, certainty in her voice. "He must have guessed we'd head for Helena." The marshal nodded agreement. "Likely so, which means you're both in danger until he's in custody." He gathered the documents, carefully returning them to their oilskin wrapping. "I'll need time to organize deputies, prepare warrants. Until then, you should stay somewhere secure." "The hotel," Ethan began. "Too risky," Sullivan interrupted. "Victor has eyes throughout the city. My home is on the outskirts near the South Ridge. My wife will make you welcome while I handle matters here." The offer was unexpected but welcome. Marshal Sullivan provided directions advising them to avoid main streets, to remain inconspicuous until he sent word that Victor was in custody. As they prepared to leave, the marshal placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Your aunt," he said quietly. "I knew her. Years back." "Margaret was a good woman," Ethan replied, surprise evident in his voice. "One of the best." Sullivan's eyes held his. "I'll see justice done for her. For your wife. You have my word." Outside, they made their way carefully through Helena's snow-covered streets, alert for any sign of Victor or his men. The city was busy despite the recent storm, people emerging to clear walkways, reopened businesses, resumed the rhythm of daily life. "How did the marshal know Margaret?" Clara asked as they walked. Ethan shook his head slightly. "I don't know. She never mentioned him." A small smile touched his lips. Though Margaret had many connections, she believed in being prepared for all contingencies. They reached the south edge of town without incident, following the marshal's directions to a modest house set back from the road surrounded by pine trees. A woman answered their knock, Marshall Sullivan's wife Mary, a practical-looking woman in her 40s, who welcomed them without question, ushering them into the warmth of her kitchen. "James sent word you'd be coming," she explained, setting coffee before them. "Said you'd had a difficult journey." The understatement almost made Clara smile despite their circumstances. "You could say that." Mary Sullivan proved to be as pragmatic as her husband, asking few questions, providing food, fresh clothing, and the promise of safety until the marshal's return. She showed them to a small guest room where they could rest, assuring them the house was secure, that neighbors would raise alarm if strangers approached. Left alone, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the morning catching up with her. They had delivered the evidence. Marshall Sullivan was preparing to arrest Victor. Their desperate journey was nearly complete. "It's almost over," she said softly. Ethan stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he agreed. "Almost." Something in his tone made Clara study him more closely. "What is it?" He turned from the window, conflict evident in his eyes. "I should be there," he said. "When they arrest Victor, I should see it happen. The marshal said to stay here, that it's safer." "I know what he said." Ethan's voice was tight with emotion long suppressed. "But Margaret deserves better. Sarah deserves better. I should be there to witness justice being done." Clara rose, moving to stand before him. "Ethan," she said gently, "you've done everything possible to bring Victor to justice. The evidence, the journey here, none of it would have happened without you." "It's not enough," he insisted, "not after everything he's taken." She understood then the depth of his need for closure, for the visual confirmation that the nightmare was truly ending. No written report, no second-hand account would suffice. He needed to see Victor Morgan in chains with his own eyes. "Then we'll go," she said simply. Ethan's surprise was evident. Clara, it's too dangerous." "We faced worse together," she reminded him. "I'm not letting you go alone." For a moment he seemed about to argue further. Then his expression softened, gratitude replacing protest. "Thank you," he said quietly. They waited until afternoon, allowing time for Marshal Sullivan to organize his deputies, prepare warrants, plan a Victor's arrest. Mary Sullivan provided them with a rough map of Helena, marking the Grand Hotel where Victor was staying, the marshal's office, potential routes between the two. "James won't like this," she warned as they prepared to leave. "But I understand why you need to go." Her eyes held Ethan's. Sometimes witnessing an ending is the only way to truly begin again. They left the Sullivan home as dusk approached, the winter sun already sinking toward distant mountains, long shadows stretching across snow-covered streets. Helena was quieter now, the day's business concluded, people retreating to the warmth of homes and taverns as temperature dropped with the sun's descent. The Grand Hotel stood in Helena's center, a three-story structure of imposing brick and ornate woodwork, its windows glowing with lamplight against the gathering darkness. From their vantage point across the street, partially concealed by a hardware store's awning, they watched as Marshal Sullivan and 6 deputies approached the hotel's entrance. "This is it," Ethan murmured, tension evident in every line of his body. Clara stood close beside him, her hand finding his, offering silent support. Together, they watched as the lawmen entered the hotel, minutes stretching interminably as they waited for some sign of what transpired within. When the hotel doors finally opened, it was Marshal Sullivan who emerged first, followed by deputies escorting a man in handcuffs, Victor Morgan. Even at a distance, the family resemblance between the brothers was evident. The same tall build, the same set of the shoulders. But where Ethan's features were open, honest, Victor's face was a study in cold calculation and privilege, accustomed to power. "That's him," Ethan confirmed, his voice barely audible. "Victor." More men followed in handcuffs. Victor's associates, his hired guns, his corrupt allies. The marshal was thorough, leaving no loose ends, no one free to continue Victor's work or seek revenge for his arrest. As the procession moved toward the jail, Victor suddenly halted, his head turning as if sensing observation. His gaze swept the street, passing over their hiding place, then returning, sharpening with recognition. For one electric moment, the brothers' eyes met across the snowy expanse, Ethan standing in shadow, Victor in custody between armed deputies. No words were exchanged, none needed. In that glance passed the culmination of years of conflict, of loss, of pursuit and evasion. Then a deputy urged Victor forward, breaking the connection. The procession continued toward the jail, disappearing around a corner, taking with it the man who had caused so much suffering, who had cast such a long shadow over so many lives. Ethan released a breath he seemed to have been holding since Margaret's death. Beside him, Clara felt tension drain from his body, not completely, but significantly, the first step in a healing long delayed. "It's done," she said softly. He nodded, eyes still fixed on the corner where Victor had vanished. "Yes," he agreed, "it's done." Later in Marshal Sullivan's office, they received confirmation of what they had witnessed. Victor Morgan and his associates were in custody, charges filed, evidence secured. The federal prosecutor was confident of convictions on multiple counts: fraud, trafficking, conspiracy, murder. "It will be months before the trial," the marshal cautioned. "These things move slowly. But Victor won't see freedom again. Not with what we have against him." "In Willow Creek?" Ethan asked, "the women still being brought there under false pretenses." "I've telegraphed the territorial governor. Federal agents are being dispatched to investigate to shut down the operation completely." Sullivan's expression was grim but satisfied. "It ends now, all of it." The marshal insisted they remain in Helena until arrangements could be made for safe transport back to Willow Creek. The danger wasn't entirely past. Victor had connections throughout the territory, men who might seek revenge despite his incarceration. "Besides," Sullivan added, "there's the matter of your testimony. Both of you." He looked between Ethan and Clara. "Your experiences, your journey here, it all strengthens the case against Victor." And they agreed to stay, accepting the marshal's continued hospitality, the security his home provided. That night, as snow fell gently outside their window, they sat before the fireplace in the Sullivans' guest room. Silence between them, comfortable rather than strained. "I keep thinking about Margaret," Ethan said finally, "about what she would say if she could see this day." Clara smiled softly. "I think she'd be proud of you, of what you've accomplished." "What we've accomplished," he corrected gently. "I wouldn't have made it to Helena without you, Clara. Wouldn't have survived that first night in the cabin." The acknowledgement warmed her more thoroughly than the fire before them. "I think," she said carefully, "that perhaps we were meant to find each other. That day at the station." Ethan's eyes met hers, firelight reflecting in their blue depths. "Margaret used to say there are no accidents, only opportunities disguised as misfortune." "A wise woman," Clara observed. "Yes." He hesitated, then continued, voice lower. "When I was delirious that first night, when I called you Sarah." Clara nodded, remembering. "You did. I want you to know," he paused, seeming to search for the right words, "what's growing between us. It's not because you remind me of her. It's because of who you are. Your strength, your compassion, your courage." The simple honesty of his statement touched something deep within her, a place long closed, sealed by grief and the horrors of war. "I know," she said softly, "just as what I feel for you isn't because you saved me from a fate like Lily's, or because you've given me purpose again." She met his gaze steadily. "It's because of who you are, Ethan Morgan." He reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers, fingers intertwining. No further words were needed in that moment, just the quiet acknowledgement of something precious growing from the ashes of all they had endured. The next morning, Marshal Sullivan arrived with unexpected news. Dr. Edwards had been arrested in Willow Creek on charges of aiding and abetting Ethan's escape. Sheriff Harlow held him in the town jail, claiming he would only release him to Victor, a ploy to draw Ethan back. "Harlow doesn't know Victor's been arrested," the marshal explained. "News hasn't reached Willow Creek yet. The telegraph lines are down from the storm." Ethan's face hardened. "We have to go back. Now." "I'll arrange an escort," Sullivan promised. 6 deputies leaving at first light tomorrow." "That's not soon enough." Ethan was already gathering his few belongings. "Edwards is the only family I have left. If Harlow realizes Victor's not coming—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Sheriff Harlow's loyalty to Victor was well established. If he felt cornered, a desperate act of revenge was all too possible. "I'm coming with you," Clara said, her tone allowing no argument. Ethan looked as though he might protest, then nodded. Together. Marshal Sullivan, recognizing the futility of trying to stop them, provided what help he could: fresh horses, supplies, weapons. By noon, they were on their way, riding west toward Willow Creek, following the main road now that Victor's capture made secrecy less imperative. They rode hard, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses, sleeping in brief shifts beside small fires that barely kept the mountain cold at bay. The journey that had taken them days of difficult travel through tunnels and wilderness now passed in a blur of steady riding, the horses' hooves eating up miles of snow-covered road. On the third day, they crested the final ridge overlooking Willow Creek. The town lay quiet in the valley below, smoke rising straight from chimneys in the still cold air. It seemed unchanged, peaceful, even belying the corruption that had festered there for years. "We need a plan," Clara said as they paused, studying the layout below. "Harlow will have men watching for us." Ethan nodded. "The jail's behind the sheriff's office on the north side of town. One entrance, barred windows. Edwards will be in the only cell." "How many deputies does Harlow have?" "3 officially, but at least twice that many men in town are on Victor's payroll, ready to do whatever Harlow asks." Clara considered this. "So a direct approach is suicide?" "Yes." Ethan's gaze swept the town, calculating. "But we have one advantage. Harlow doesn't know we're coming today. He's expecting Victor, and Victor wouldn't travel at night." "So we wait until dark," Clara surmised. Ethan nodded. "And we don't go in through the front door." As dusk settled over Willow Creek, they left their horses concealed in a stand of pines and made their way cautiously toward town. They avoided the main street instead, keeping to shadows between buildings, moving with the silent caution of those who understood that discovery meant death. The sheriff's office stood on the town's north edge, its windows glowing with lamplight. 2 men lounged on the porch, rifles across their knees, guards expecting trouble, but not immediately. "The jail's connected to the back of the building," Ethan whispered as they observed from the shelter of a nearby stable. "There's a small window high up on the west wall. Too small for a man, but not too small for me," Clara finished for him. "It's too dangerous," he began, but she cut him off. "We've had this conversation before. I'm going." Ethan studied her face in the gathering darkness, seeing the determination there, the courage that had carried her through battlefields and blizzards alike. He nodded once, accepting. "I'll create a distraction at the front. Get the guards away from the building. You slip in through the window, find Edwards, get him out the back way. There's a door that leads to the alley." "What about you?" Clara asked. "How will you get away?" A grim smile touched his lips. "I know this town better than Harlow ever will. Meet me at Margaret's cabin. 1 hour." Clara didn't like the plan, too many variables, too much risk, but she recognized it as their best option. They had surprise on their side, and time was against them. The longer they delayed, the greater the chance of discovery. 1 hour, she agreed. "Be careful. You too." They separated, Ethan circling toward the front of the building, while Clara made her way to the west wall. The jail window was indeed small, high up on the wall, but a stack of crates provided access. She waited in shadow, counting breaths until a commotion erupted from the street, side shouts, then gunfire. Ethan's distraction. Moving quickly, she scaled the crates, forced the window open, and squeezed through the narrow opening. She dropped into darkness, landing with a soft thud on a dirt floor. The jail was a single room with the 3 cells, only one occupied. "Dr. Edwards," she whispered, moving to the barred door. The old doctor sat up on his cot, squinting in the dim light. "Miss Wilson, what are you doing here?" "Getting you out." She examined the lock, simple, but she needed a key. "Where do they keep the keys?" "On Harlow's belt," Edwards replied grimly, "or in his desk in the front office." Clara's mind raced. The front office, where the distraction was focused, where Harlow and his men would be. But without the key, this rescue was pointless. "Stay here," she whispered, a somewhat absurd instruction, given the circumstances. "Not planning on going anywhere," Edwards responded dryly. Clara crept to the door connecting the jail to the sheriff's office, pressing her ear against the wood. Voices from beyond, angry, urgent, then the sound of a door slamming, footsteps receding. The distraction had worked. Harlow and his men had gone outside. She eased the door open a crack. The office was empty, dimly lit by a single lamp. Moving swiftly, she searched the desk, rifling through drawers, until her fingers closed around a ring of heavy iron keys. Back in the jail, it took 3 attempts to find the right key, each metallic scrape sounding impossibly loud to her straining ears. Finally, the lock turned, the cell door swinging open with a protesting creak. "Come on," she urged. "Ethan's waiting." Dr. Edwards didn't need to be told twice. Despite his age, he moved with surprising agility, following Clara to the back door. It was locked, but the keys she'd taken opened it as well. They slipped into the alley, keeping to shadows, making their way toward the town's edge. Behind them, shouts and occasional gunfire suggested Ethan's distraction continued, drawing Harlow and his men on a fruitless chase through Willow Creek streets. They reached the cover of trees just as a cold moon crested the eastern ridge, silvering the landscape. Clara led the way toward Margaret's cabin, following the path she and Ethan had taken days earlier, a lifetime ago it seemed. The cabin stood dark and silent in its clearing, no sign of Ethan yet. Clara ushered Edwards inside, fumbling to light a lamp. The interior was exactly as they'd left it, though noticeably colder without a fire in the hearth. "What happened?" Edwards asked as Clara busied herself building a fire. "Harlow said Victor was coming for me, that I'd led his brother astray for the last time." "Victor's been arrested," Clara explained, arranging kindling. "In Helena, federal charges. He won't be free again." The doctor sank into the rocking chair, disbelief and tentative hope warring on his weathered face. "You and Ethan, you made it through. Got the evidence to Sullivan." "Yes." The fire caught small flames licking at the dry wood. "It's over. The women, the land fraud, all of it." Edward shook his head slowly, wonder in his voice. "I never thought I'd see the day. After Margaret, after Sarah, I thought Victor was untouchable." Clara's hands stilled on the hearth. "How did you know them, Margaret and Sarah?" The doctor's expression grew distant, remembering. "Margaret was my sister-in-law," he said softly. "I was married to her sister, Catherine. We came west together, the three of us, started fresh after the war. And Sarah, a brave girl, too brave perhaps." Sadness deepened the lines around his eyes. "She loved Ethan fiercely, would have done anything to protect him." Clara added another log to the growing fire. "Ethan said you're the only family he has left." Edwards's gaze dropped to his hands, twisting restlessly in his lap. "There's something I never told him, something I should have years ago." Before he could continue, the cabin door opened. Ethan entered, breathing hard, a streak of blood on his cheek, but otherwise unharmed. His eyes found Clara, first relief evident in his expression, then moved to Edwards. "You're safe," he said, tension draining from his shoulders. "Thanks to your young lady here," Edwards replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "Quite the nurse you've found." Ethan crossed to Clara, touching her shoulder briefly, a gesture of gratitude of connection. "Harlow's still searching the east side of town. We don't have long before he realizes we've slipped away." "Where will we go?" Clara asked. "Back to Helena. Marshal Sullivan's deputies are a day behind us. They'll restore order here." Ethan turned to Edwards. "Are you strong enough to ride tonight?" The doctor nodded. "I've endured worse than a few days in Harlow's jail." "Good. We'll leave in an hour. Pack only what you need." As Edwards moved to gather his medical supplies, Ethan pulled Clara aside. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Something I found in Harlow's office. Letters from Victor, plans for the new railroad line." His voice lowered further. "And documents about Edwards." "What kind of documents?" "Records from years ago." Ethan's expression was troubled. "Clara, I think there's more to Edwards than he's told me. Something about my father." Before she could respond, a sound outside silenced them both, the unmistakable crunch of boots on snow. Many boots. They had company. Ethan moved to the window, peering through frost-edged glass. "Harlow," he confirmed grimly, "and at least 10 men. They've surrounded the cabin." Edwards joined them, face pale in the firelight. "The back way through the root cellar." "They'll have that covered too," Ethan said. "Harlow knows about Margaret's escape routes." A voice called from outside, harsh in the winter stillness. "Morgan, I know you're in there, you and the doctor. Come out now, and maybe the woman doesn't have to die too." Ethan's hand moved to his gun. Clara's mind raced, calculating options, finding few. They were outnumbered, surrounded with limited ammunition, and no hope of immediate reinforcement. "I need to tell you something," Edwards said, urgently gripping Ethan's arm. "Before whatever happens next, I should have told you years ago." "Not now," Ethan began, but the doctor's intensity stopped him. "Yes, now, because there may not be another chance." Edwards took a deep breath. "Joseph Morgan wasn't your father." The statement hung in the air between them, impossible, world-changing. Ethan stared at the older man, disbelief warring with a dawning understanding. "What?" he managed finally. "Your mother and I, before she married Joseph, we were young in love." Edwards's voice shook with emotion long suppressed. "When she discovered she was with child with you, her father forced the marriage to Joseph. A wealthy match respectable. I was nothing a country doctor without prospects. You're my father. Ethan's voice was barely audible. Edwards nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. Margaret knew. She was the only one. She helped me stay close to watch over you when I could. After your mother died, when Joseph's treatment of you worsened, Margaret intervened, brought you to live with her. And Victor? Ethan asked. Does he know? I don't think so, but Joseph suspected. It's why he was so much harder on you than on Victor. Why he... Edward stopped, unable to speak of the beatings, the scars Clara had seen on Ethan's back. Outside, Harlow's voice came again, impatient now. Last chance, Morgan! Ethan stood frozen, the revelation washing over him in waves. Clara watched his face, saw shock give way to understanding, to a sudden clarity about his past, his place in the world. We need to do something, she said gently. They'll rush the cabin soon. Her voice seemed to break the spell. Ethan blinked, focus returning to his eyes. Yes, he agreed, then to Edwards, to his father. We'll talk more about this later. Right now, we need to survive. Edwards nodded, accepting the temporary postponement of a conversation 30 years delayed. The cabin will burn, he said. Margaret designed it that way. A last resort. There's coal oil beneath the floorboards, in a tunnel under the hearth. It comes out 50 yards into the woods. You want us to burn the cabin? Clara asked, incredulous. With us inside? Not exactly. A grim smile touched the doctor's lips. The trapdoor to the tunnel is built to withstand fire long enough for escape. The flames will drive Harlow's men back, create confusion. By the time they realize we're gone, we'll be well away. It was desperate, dangerous, but Clara recognized it as their only chance. Ethan was already moving, pulling up the rug to reveal the trapdoor Edwards had described. Help me with this, he instructed. Together they lifted the heavy wooden door, exposing a narrow shaft with a ladder descending into darkness. Edwards, meanwhile, pried up floorboards near the walls, exposing containers of coal oil strategically placed. You go first, Ethan told Clara, handing her a small lamp. I'll follow with Edwards. Clara hesitated, reluctant to leave them, but recognizing the logic. She took the lamp and descended the ladder, finding herself in a narrow tunnel, shored up with timbers, another of Margaret's escape routes built with the foresight that had characterized her life's work. Ethan helped Edwards to the trap door, lowering him carefully to Clara waiting below. The old doctor's movements were stiff, hindered by days in a cold cell, but determination kept him moving. Just as Ethan prepared to follow, the cabin door splintered inward. Sheriff Harlow stood framed in the doorway, scarred face twisted with rage, pistol raised. Morgan, he snarled, firing. The bullet struck wood inches from Ethan's head. He dropped through the trap door, pulling it shut above him, just as Harlow fired again. The bullet embedded itself in the thick oak. Go, Ethan urged, pushing Edwards ahead as he dropped the bar across the trap door from below, securing it against immediate pursuit. They'll realize what we're doing any second. They hurried through the tunnel, Clara leading with the lamp, Edwards between them, Ethan bringing up the rear. Behind them, muffled shouts suggested Harlow had discovered the coal oil, understood what it meant. The tunnel was short but felt endless, every second stretching as they waited for the sounds of pursuit, for the whoosh of flames igniting above. When they finally reached the exit, a narrow opening concealed by a fallen log, Clara emerged to find the night still peaceful, stars brilliant overhead. Only when they were all safely out, concealed in the shelter of dense pines, did they look back toward the cabin. Flames were just beginning to lick at its walls, rising quickly as the coal oil caught and spread. Men scattered from the burning structure, Harlow among them, shouting orders lost to distance. We need to move, Ethan said urgently, before they organize a search. They made their way through the forest, following game trails Edwards knew from years of hunting in these mountains. The doctor led them to a small lean-to where he kept emergency supplies, including mercifully 3 horses. I've learned to be prepared, he explained as they mounted. Margaret's influence. They rode hard through the night, keeping to less traveled paths, avoiding the main roads where Harlow might have set watchers. By dawn, they had put significant distance between themselves and Willow Creek, though Clara knew the pursuit would continue until they reached the safety of Marshal Sullivan's jurisdiction. As morning light filtered through pine boughs, they paused to rest the horses beside a small stream. Clara tended to Ethan's wounds, a bullet graze on his arm she hadn't noticed in the chaos of their escape, minor, but needing cleaning. Edwards watched his son with the trained eye of both doctor and father, concern and pride mingling in his gaze. All those years, Ethan said, finally breaking the silence that had stretched between them since the revelation at the cabin. You knew and you never told me. Edwards's shoulders slumped. I was a coward, he admitted, afraid of Joseph's influence, of what it might mean for you if the truth came out. After he died, it seemed too late. You had built a life, found Sarah. Does Victor know? Ethan asked again, the question that seemed to concern him most. I don't think so. Joseph never acknowledged his suspicions publicly. And Victor worshipped Joseph, emulated him in everything. Edwards's voice lowered, including his cruelty. Clara finished bandaging Ethan's arm, but stayed close, offering silent support as he processed this revelation that changed everything he had believed about himself. I kept telling myself I was protecting you by staying silent, Edwards continued. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from rejection, from the responsibility of being a father when I'd never been allowed to learn how. He looked directly at Ethan, pain and regret naked in his eyes. I'm sorry, more than I can ever express. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this, weighing 30 years of absence against the many small kindnesses Edwards had shown him throughout his life. Medical care when he was ill, quiet encouragement when Joseph's criticism cut too deep, shelter when he needed it most. You were there, he said finally. Not as a father, but you were there. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement, understanding. A beginning. Edwards nodded, accepting this tentative peace offering with visible gratitude. We should move on, he said, rising. Sullivan's deputies will be looking for us on the main road. If we push hard, we can meet them by nightfall. They continued eastward, riding through a landscape transformed by recent snow, brilliant under a clear winter sky. Clara found herself watching Ethan, noting the subtle changes in his bearing as he absorbed the knowledge that he was not in fact a Morgan, that the blood that had seemed to condemn him, to connect him to Victor's cruelty, was not his heritage after all. By mid-afternoon, they encountered Marshal Sullivan's deputies heading west, 6 armed men led by a seasoned federal officer. The reunion brought relief, and the news that Victor remained in custody in Helena, his initial hearing already completed, formal charges filed. He'll hang, the led deputy said bluntly. No judge in the territory will show mercy after what's in those documents. Clara expected satisfaction from Ethan at this pronouncement. Instead, she saw something more complex pass across his face, not quite regret, but a somber acknowledgement of waste of potential, corrupted of a brotherhood that might have been. They reached Helena 2 days later, the city unchanged in their brief absence, still bustling with the energy of a growing territorial capital. Marshal Sullivan met them at his office, relief evident in his expression. I thought you might have gotten yourselves killed, he admitted. Harlow's telegraphed that you burned down half of Willow Creek in your escape. Just Margaret's cabin, Ethan corrected. And Harlow's the one who set it ablaze technically. We just provided the means. Sullivan shook his head, a reluctant smile touching his lips. Well, it doesn't matter now. Harlow's been removed from office. Federal authorities have taken control of Willow Creek pending a full investigation. And Victor? Edwards asked. Still secure, still facing a long list of charges. The marshal studied the older man's face. You look like you've been through hell, Doctor. And back, Edwards agreed wearily. Sullivan insisted they stay in Helena until the immediate danger had passed, until federal presence in Willow Creek was firmly established. Clara found herself grateful for the respite, for time to process all that had happened, for the luxury of safety, after days of constant vigilance. 1 week into their stay, Marshal Sullivan approached Ethan with an unexpected request. Victor's asking to see you, he said. Says he has something to tell you, something important. Ethan's initial refusal was immediate, instinctive. But as evening fell, Clara found him standing at the window of their room at the Sullivan house, conflict evident in his stance. You're considering it, she observed quietly. He didn't turn. I keep thinking about what my father said, about Joseph suspecting I wasn't his son, about Victor not knowing. You think Victor deserves to know the truth? I don't know what Victor deserves anymore. Ethan's voice was troubled. For so long, he was the monster in this story, the villain I was fighting against. Now you're discovering the story is more complicated, Clara finished for him. He nodded. Exactly. In the end, Ethan chose to see his brother alone. Clara waited anxiously at the Sullivan house, wondering what could possibly pass between the two men, now one facing a hangman's noose, the other discovering his life had been built on a foundation of lies. When Ethan returned hours later, his expression was unreadable, closed in a way she hadn't seen since those first days at Margaret's cabin. "What happened?" she asked gently. He sat heavily in a chair by the fire, eyes fixed on the flames. "Victor knew," he said finally, "about Edwards being my father. He's known for years." Clara sat opposite him, waiting, sensing there was more. "He said Joseph told him when he was 18, used it to poison him against me to ensure Victor's loyalty." Ethan's voice was hollow. "Said I was nothing but a cuckoo in the nest, that everything that should have been Victor's, land money, Margaret's affection, was being wasted on another man's bastard." Oh, Ethan, the cruelty of it, the calculated destruction of what should have been a bond of brotherhood, left her breathless. "There's more." He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Victor said he never intended to kill me. That day at the station when I was shot, he meant it as a warning to frighten me into silence. But the man he sent got spooked, fired too soon, too close." "Do you believe him?" Ethan considered this. "I don't know, maybe. Victor's many things, but I never knew him to be a liar, not outright." He paused. "He asked for my forgiveness." "And did you give it?" "No." The word was firm, certain. "Some things can't be forgiven, not by me anyway. But I told him I understood, that Joseph had poisoned him as surely as a snake's venom, that we were both victims of a cruel man's games." Clara reached across the space between them, taking his hand. "What happens now?" "Victor will face trial, will likely hang." Ethan's fingers curled around hers. "Edwards, my father, and I will return to Willow Creek eventually, try to undo some of the damage Victor caused. And the women, the ones still being lured west. We continue Margaret's work, Sarah's work. We build something better from what's left." His eyes held hers. "If you're still willing." "I am," she said simply. Spring came to Montana in fits and starts, snow melting, then falling again, greenery emerging tentatively from winter's grip, then retreating as frost returned. By April, the transformation was complete, valleys lush with new growth, mountainsides vibrant with wildflowers. Clara stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt cabin, watching as Ethan and Edwards worked in what would become a garden, another sign of permanence of their commitment to creating something lasting from the ruins Victor had left behind. 3 months had passed since that night at Marshall Sullivan's house. 3 months of gradual healing, of cautious rebuilding, of forging new connections from old wounds. Victor's trial had concluded swiftly, his sentence commuted from hanging to life imprisonment after Ethan's unexpected testimony suggested that Joseph Morgan's influence had been the root of his son's corruption. Edwards had formally claimed Ethan as his son, a public acknowledgement that caused ripples of gossip throughout the territory, but ultimately changed little in the day-to-day reality of their relationship, which continued to grow tentatively into something resembling true father and son. And Clara had found purpose, connection, home. The cabin was the center of operations now for what they simply called Margaret's Network, an organized effort to identify and assist women lured west under false pretenses. With federal support, thanks to Marshall Sullivan's influence, they had already helped dozens of women either return east or establish themselves independently in the territory. The morning mail had brought a letter from Lily, now safely settled with family in Oregon. She wrote of planting a garden, of the possibility of teaching at the local school of a young farmer who called with increasing frequency. A life rebuilt from ashes. Clara felt Ethan's approach before she saw him, a change in the air, a presence now as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. He joined her at the porch railing, his shoulder brushing hers, comfortable in the closeness they had earned through danger and revelation alike. "Edwards says the apple trees should take root well here," he said, nodding toward the young saplings they'd planted along the cabin's south side. "Won't bear fruit for years, but—" He shrugged. "We have time." "Yes," Clara agreed, reaching into her pocket to touch the watch that had traveled so far to return to her. "We do." Ethan's hand found hers, warm and solid and real. They stood together, watching spring assert itself across the Montana landscape, the world renewing itself as it had done countless times before, as it would do countless times again long after they were gone. In her other pocket, Clara carried another watch, Sarah's watch with its inscription, To EW, time reveals truth. EW, she had learned, was Elizabeth Winters, Margaret's full name before marriage. The watch had passed from Margaret to Sarah, from Sarah to Clara, a legacy of women who refused to accept the world as it was, who worked instead to build the world that should be. "Rider coming?" Edwards called from the garden, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. Clara tensed, old habits of vigilance not yet entirely abandoned. But Ethan remained relaxed beside her, small smile touching his lips. "It's just Sullivan," he said as the distant figure resolved into the familiar form of the federal marshal. "Probably with news about the Railroad Commission's decision. The decision that would determine whether the illegal land seizures orchestrated by Victor would be reversed, whether settlers would reclaim their homes, whether justice would be served not just for Margaret and Sarah, but for all those who had suffered under the Morgan name." As Sullivan dismounted, lifting a hand in greeting, Clara felt a certainty settle over her. Whatever news he brought, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, she and Ethan and Edwards and all those who chose to stand with them. From the ashes of what had been destroyed, they would build something new, something better. A promise kept, a legacy honored, a future claimed. Time indeed revealed truth, and the truth it had revealed was both simple and profound, that even in the darkest moments, hope remained. That from the ashes of despair, promises could be made, kept, fulfilled. As afternoon sun gilded the Montana landscape, Clara Wilson stood beside Ethan Edwards, not as nurse and patient, not as fugitives, not as avengers seeking justice, but simply as partners in the continuing journey of life. A journey that had begun with a wounded man and a deceived woman. A journey that would continue day by day, season by season, built on promises made and kept. Promises from ashes.